This story takes place after a long night of work that went into the wee hours of the morning. I had left and was headed home down the highway to be on my way home. It was almost early in the morning, but there was still about an hour of darkness left before the sun started to come up, so there was almost nobody out on the road. It was quiet and relaxing. After about 30 minutes into the drive, I looked up into my rearview mirror, and there was a single car with its headlights coming in super fast. I paid it no mind, assuming it was just another person on their way home from work like me. But then I had noticed the guy was going at an alarmingly fast speed, like at least 20 over, and he was directly behind me. I was in the right lane, so I expected him to go around me, and I still didn't pay it much attention. But when it looked like he was directly behind me, all of a sudden, with a ton of aggression, he veered to the side, nearly colliding with the back end of my car. Now, we were side to side for a brief moment, and when I looked over, he flipped me off, screaming, but I couldn't hear him because I had music on in my car. To even my own surprise, this made me extremely mad. Who does this guy think he is, speeding around me like that, and then flipping me off? I had a long day at work, and this was the last thing that I needed. I honked at him to retaliate, but this only made him more mad, and he honked back at me and then flipped me off once again before flooring it and speeding away even faster. I was just relieved to see that he was now gone. But here's where things get really interesting. Just as he sped away, leaving a trail of exhaust fumes behind him from his truck, about a minute went by. I then noticed him up on the road again. I was now gaining on him. His speed has slowed down significantly, and initially I had this crazy idea to pass the guy and give him the finger back. But I got a really bad feeling as my car started to approach his. I didn't know what the man would do. It seemed like he was intentionally slowing down. Maybe this guy was dangerous and would try to crash me or something like that. I thought better of it before I went around the guy. Instead, I slowed my vehicle down. I looked back at the speedometer, and now he was going about 40 miles per hour, and I was probably going about 50. I realized this guy was definitely waiting for me to pull up next to him. And luckily, there was an exit that I could take last minute. So I did, and without thinking, I pulled off, when it was too late for the man to slow down and take the exit. After I took that exit, I pulled over for a minute to make sure that the driver was long gone. I took a deep breath and merged back onto the freeway. As I drove along, trying to calm down, I noticed flashing lights in the distance. I thought to myself, not again with another crazy driver. The flashing lights of police cars ended up zooming past me, sirens blaring and lights flashing. I continued my drive home, never seeing where the police cars had gone, and never seeing that crazy guy's car either. But the next morning, not long after I woke up, I heard the chilling story from the news. I found out the exact man who had angrily sped past me had been caught by the police the previous night after a brief chase. He had been wanted for killing somebody earlier that evening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That same guy who flipped me off, and I had almost passed on the road. What if I would have tried to pass him and flip him off? Was he slowing down to do something to me?
This is something that happened back in August of 2014. At the time, I was 16 years old and preparing to take my driving test. I had already got my permit a few months earlier and was taking my behind-the-wheel classes. I remember I would meet with a guy, and he had a special car with a brake on the passenger side. He would sit in the passenger seat as I drove and would tell me where to go and teach me things. I had to do 3 3-hour sessions with him, and then I would be ready to take my driving test. The first session with the guy, we did some neighborhood driving and a little bit of highway driving. The second session was mostly city driving, and the last one was a bit of everything and parking. On the night of this story, it was my third and final session with the guy. I can't remember what his name was, but he was pretty cool. He was easygoing and a solid teacher. I remembered that the session started at about 6 p.m. We started driving on a few different roads and reviewing stuff. I don't remember a lot of the details, but by about 8 p.m. probably, the sun was setting and it was getting dark out. We then drove to this one park. It was a quiet and empty park with an empty parking lot attached to it. I had no clue even what city we were in because I had never been to that area before. I was asked to park the car, and then the instructor got out and set up a few of those really small and cheap orange cones. He set them up as basic guidelines for a parking space for me to follow. Then he got back inside the car, and we started to practice parking. We were at one far end of the parking lot, which wasn't that big, but had a decent amount of space for us to use. The streets surrounding it were mostly residential and very quiet. As I was starting to practice parking, another car drove down the street, and I noticed it enter the same parking lot that we were in. It came from down at the other end though, so I didn't think too much of it. The car then parked in a parking space far on the other end, away from us. I kept practicing my parking for the next several minutes, not focusing on the car that had parked at all. Nobody got out of it or anything, and it remained there. Then, a few minutes later, another car entered the parking lot near where the other one had. This car drove a little ways closer to us and then parked, still a ways away. I remember that my instructor made a little comment like, "I wonder what these guys are doing here now." It did seem odd for people to park here when it was dark out. We had gone there because we figured it would be an empty parking lot, at least that's what I was assuming. Still, I did my best to just focus on my parking. I was doing pretty good and hadn't really hit the cones at all. I thought that parking was going to be the hardest part of the driving test for me. Then, one of the cars suddenly backed out of the space that it was in. There were 2 exits to the parking lot that we were in, one at each end of it. At first, I thought the car was going to pass us by and leave. But as I had just parked into the space we made with the cones, the car drove behind us and then stopped. It was only a few feet back and right behind us. I wasn't really sure what to do. My instructor seemed to be confused by this as well. After like a minute, the car still hadn't moved and was right behind us. We certainly weren't in their way or anything, and they could easily go around us to leave. My instructor said that he was going to see what was going on and told me to wait there. Then he opened up his door and got out. He started approaching the vehicle, and I didn't watch him because I was just looking straight ahead, waiting for him to get back. All of a sudden, I just remember that my instructor got back in the car really fast, a lot quicker than I had expected. He seemed panicked, and he told me to leave the parking lot. I mentioned that we hadn't picked up the cones, but he said that it didn't matter. I could tell that he was nervous. I began driving away, and when we left the parking lot, the car behind us did as well. My driving instructor told me not to panic, but he saw a guy in the car behind us had a gun. He said when he got out to talk to them, he saw it. Then he got back in our car. Now the other car that had been in the parking lot as well was also following us. I was terrified, especially because I was driving. My driving instructor told me that we were going to the police station. He said to not speed and to stay calm. He then gave me step-by-step directions on how to get there. It only took us about 5 to 10 minutes, but it felt like forever. The 2 cars followed us the entire way. They didn't try to pass us or do anything. When we got to the police station, I pulled in and they kept going. I parked the car and my driving instructor and I went inside. We reported the incident, and after that, the driving lesson was cut short. My parents were called and I got picked up. I was just happy to be okay. I'm glad that my driving instructor seemed to know what to do in that situation. I ended up passing my driving test on the first try, but I will never forget that experience. I have a job in the city. It's a major city with all of the tall buildings and everything that you would expect. My house is about a 20-minute drive, and I commute to and from work every day. It isn't too bad, but there often is rush hour traffic, especially on the way home. This event took place about 4 months ago, and after a long day of work. I got done at 5 p.m., which is when many other people do. Many times I'm able to leave a little bit earlier, but on this day I didn't. There was rush hour traffic and many other cars on the freeway. I would take the freeway for about 10 minutes, then the final 10 minutes of my drive would be on quieter roads. So just about 5 minutes into the drive, things were starting to get really backed up. We were crawling along the freeway, and I was in the far right lane of 4 total lanes. The one in the far left was the carpool lane. We started moving a little bit, getting up to maybe 40 miles per hour. Still slow, but faster than we had been moving. At that point, there was a little bit of an open space in the lanes next to me. I saw a car come up from behind 2 lanes over. When it got about even with me, it changed into the lane next to me without a turn signal. But then, it kept going and cut into my lane right in front of me. I had maybe a car length and a half between the car in front of me. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting the guy. He had no turn signal on, so I didn't even know that he was turning. I honked my horn and was pretty ticked off. The guy was now right in front of me. I cooled off after a minute or so as traffic continued to lighten up. Cars moved around a little, and the guy that cut me off went out of sight, passing some cars. I also switched lanes to pass a semi-truck. After that though, traffic started to slow down again and get congested, and just a couple of minutes later, I saw the car who had cut me off again. He had gotten stuck behind a semi-truck, and there was a line of cars passing him, which is where I was. I noticed a little bit of a gap between myself and the car in front of me. I sped up, not wanting to let him in, remembering how he had screwed me before. He started to try to move over in front of me, but couldn't. I passed him by, and he got in line behind me. Unfortunately, the person behind me was nice and let him in. As soon as traffic lightened up a little more, and we got moving again, the guy swerved around me. It was borderline reckless, and he then cut me off again. I had enough of this guy and just wanted to get away from him. Plus, my exit was coming up. I switched lanes to the right. I then saw the guy start to slow down. When he did, I passed him and saw him flipping me off. I wasn't going to let this bother me. I knew that I didn't do anything wrong and he was driving like an idiot. Soon, I changed lanes again, but noticed the guy changed lanes and he was still behind me. When I took my exit off of the freeway, I saw the guy change lanes suddenly and take the exit behind me as well. This was a little bit concerning because I did not want this crazy guy following me home. As I drove down one road, he was right behind me the entire time. I changed roads to another one, and he was still there. The longer that he followed me, the more frustrated I became. I could not believe this guy. How crazy do you have to be to follow somebody home after cutting them off? When I got to my street, I wanted to confront him and give him a piece of my mind. I arrived back home and pulled into my driveway. When I did, the man stopped at the end of my driveway but didn't go in. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood and have a somewhat long driveway and large front yard, so I was surprised that he would follow me all the way back but not go into my driveway. After I parked though, I got out of my car. I was feeling brave, I guess, because I didn't feel in any danger at all. I think I was more mad than anything. After I got out, I walked behind my car and looked out to the man. He was still inside of his car with the engine running. I yelled out to him, asking what his problem was. Then, suddenly, the man started driving. He started going up my driveway and heading straight for me. It was like he was trying to run me over. I jumped back and ran behind my car, which was all I had time to do. He got close, but then slammed on his brakes and stopped just a few feet away from the back of my car. Then he turned to the left, where I was, and started driving forward. I just ran around to my backyard trying to get away from him. He didn't hit me and stopped at the end of my driveway. After I had made it around to the back of my house, I heard some tires screeching, and finally the sounds of him driving away. When I was sure that he was gone, I walked back out to the front yard. I saw some tire marks in my driveway and saw that the guy had also ran over my mailbox. But other than that, everything was fine. Of course, I called the police and reported him. But unfortunately, in the midst of all this, I didn't remember his license plate number. Since this experience, I feel like I've become more of a defensive driver. Luckily, I haven't had any more problems with people on the road. I also haven't seen that guy since.
This story takes place about a year ago. I went to my best friend's house and was there until late at night hanging out. We would hang out at each other's houses late at night all the time. We were like sisters. On this particular night, at about midnight, I got tired and decided to drive back to my house, which was only about 1.5 miles away. We lived in basically the same neighborhood, which was a very populated area with many houses and quiet streets in a several-mile radius. I left my friend's house, backed out of her driveway, and began to drive slowly down the quiet streets back to my place. But almost immediately, after I started driving down the street, I saw that in my rearview mirror, a man was jogging on the sidewalk. This was a little strange for it being midnight, and I noticed that the guy jogging was going at such a fast speed that he was approaching my car. I was only going maybe 10 or 15 miles per hour, so I sped up, but I soon had to stop at a stop sign. As I slowed down, I saw the man had now gone off the sidewalk and was approaching my car, running. It seemed really surprising to me, and I drove off from the stop sign maybe 10 feet before the man had reached my car. It really looked to me like he was running straight for me. I didn't know what he could have possibly wanted with me, but I was glad I drove away. After I did, I saw the man run back onto the sidewalk. I kept driving slowly down the street, as the speed limit was 20 miles per hour and there were a handful of cars parked on the side of the road. I came to another stop sign and continued on.
I didn't see the man anymore and thought that he was long gone. But then, I stopped at another stop sign a short time later, and as I was slowing down, I saw the man appear again. He was on the sidewalk and had been blocked by a line of trees between the sidewalk and the street. He was running again and veered out into the street and ran towards my car one more time. It caught me by surprise, and I sped away from the stop sign just about as he reached my car. This time, he probably got within 5 feet of it. The guy was really creeping me out, and I knew he was trying to get at my car for some reason. The rest of the way home, I made sure to drive faster than I had been. All I really had to do to get home was turn left, then drive a ways before I would be on my street. The total drive was maybe 5 minutes. I didn't see the man for the rest of the drive, and once I had reached my house, I pulled into the driveway. After I had stopped my car, I started unbuckling and turned it off. I opened the door and got outside, but then I saw the man again. This time, he was coming out from behind a tree that was in my next-door neighbor's yard. He was headed straight for me once again. I quickly ran back inside my car, locked the doors, and started the engine again. The man got all the way to my driver's door and even tried opening it before I backed out of the driveway and sped away. I drove away so fast there was no way he could catch up with me this time. I called the police once I was sort of far away, and then drove around until they reached my house. Then I went back. Obviously, the man was long gone by then, and all I could really do was give the police his description. After the police left, I went back to my friend's house and spent the night there. I did return to my place the next night, and I'm happy to say I never saw the man again.
This happened when I was driving to work very early one morning. It was probably a little bit after 5 a.m. and very dark and quiet outside. I enjoyed driving to work this early because of that. There was hardly anybody else out, and it made driving easy. Well, I work about 15 minutes from my house. I don't really take any major highways to get there though. It's mostly just quieter roads. After leaving, I drove the first 10 minutes no problem. As I was driving on a quieter road, which would go all the way to my work, I saw a guy riding on a bike up ahead. He was riding sort of on the side of the road. This road had 2 lanes, one going in each direction, and not much of a shoulder or anything. So the guy on the bike was like sort of on the line. I was planning to go into the oncoming traffic lane to pass him, because nobody else was out driving or anything. There wasn't another car in sight. When I got closer to the guy riding the bike though, he moved to the left. Now he was driving right in the middle of my lane. I slowed down, and when I got closer still, the man moved over some more. He was kind of starting to swerve all over the place, and I wasn't quite sure what he was doing. It all seemed very controlled though, not like he didn't know how to ride the bike or something. It was like he was trying to swerve around. I was now going at about the same speed as he was, very slow. I moved over to the other lane, but then he moved over as well. He was going back and forth between lanes as if he was trying to block me. It seemed like there was no way I could safely pass him, so I just drove slowly behind him and waited for him to move. Either he had no idea that I was here, or he was purposely trying to block me. After following him at a snail's pace for like 2 or 3 minutes, I finally honked at him. He was going to make me late for work, and I couldn't take it anymore. After honking, he still didn't move. He remained in the middle of the road and actually gave me the middle finger. He didn't turn around, but just stuck his hand up in the air. So clearly he knew that I was back here, and I wanted to get around him, but I guess that he was just trying to be a jerk. So I continued behind him now for about another minute. There was a stop sign up ahead and an intersection. I would have the option to turn right, and I took it. Now, I wasn't quite sure where this was going exactly, but I was pretty sure that I could still get to work this way. After turning right, I then took a left. I figured that if I found another road soon going left, I could reconnect with my original road. Then I would almost certainly be ahead of the guy on the bike. So I drove for a few minutes, and then was able to connect back with the road like I had planned. When I did, I was just a little ways ahead of the biker, and could see him a ways behind me. I drove on this road for less than a minute before my workplace was up on the right side though. I turned into the parking lot and parked my car. Luckily, I had just made it and wasn't late. Right after I parked, I saw the biker going by on the street. He looked at me the entire time, but didn't do anything. Then I went inside to work. The workday went on as normal, and I don't leave the building at all when I'm there. Hours later, when I was leaving for the day, I walked out to see that my car was all scratched up. It appeared as though somebody had keyed it, and I thought I knew exactly who it was. It had to be the guy on the bike. For whatever reason, he was trying to make me mad, and then when I honked at him, he got mad. I couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that I could do. There was no security cameras in the parking lot, and nobody saw him do it, so sadly, I had no proof. I also had no idea who exactly he was. I got my car fixed, and after that, didn't see the biker again. I don't work that job anymore, but whenever I think about it, I think about the biker story.
One time, a few months ago, I was driving my car late at night. I was on a quiet road and driving about 5 miles per hour above the speed limit. The road had just 2 lanes, one for traffic going the way I was, and the other was for oncoming traffic. I was just trying to get home and listening to the radio. I remember at one point, I came up on a smaller pickup truck driving up ahead. When I approached it, I slowed down because the truck was driving much slower than I was. But soon, things got kind of ridiculous. The speed limit on this road was 50 miles per hour, and we were going almost 30 miles per hour. I remained behind the truck, going very slowly for 2 or 3 minutes. Then, I decided that I would pass the truck. Maybe something was wrong with it, and it couldn't go very fast. I wasn't in a big hurry or anything, but going that much slower than the speed limit, I lost patience. I pulled out into the oncoming lane of traffic. Luckily, these roads were really quiet, and nobody was coming in the other direction at all. I started to pass the truck easily, but before I could clear it, the truck started speeding up. I was going about 55, and soon the truck was going at least 55 as well. This made me really angry. I sped up even more, and was finally able to clear the truck now that I was in front of him. But unfortunately, the truck was now right on my tail. His headlights were so close, I wondered if his truck would bump into my car. It looked like a man was driving, but I couldn't really see all that well. Luckily, the truck didn't bump mine. Still, as I was going now 60 miles per hour, which was 10 over the limit, he was still right behind me. We both drove like this for maybe about a minute. When I saw that he hadn't let up at all, I decided that it would be best to just let him pass. I had to drive on this road for maybe another 5 miles or so, and there weren't any other roads to turn onto in the immediate area, so I decided to just pull over. I put on my hazard lights and moved over to the side of the road. As soon as I did, the truck behind me did as well. Now I was really mad. Was this guy angry with me for trying to pass him, and now he was following me? He had been going so slow, anybody would have done the same thing I did. I kept slowing down, and my car came to a stop. The truck did as well. We both sat there in our vehicles for a few seconds. I was angry, and I guess I was feeling like a tough guy. I decided I was going to get out and talk to the driver of the truck and ask him what his problem was. I opened up my door and started walking towards the truck. When I did, I held out my hands as if to say, "What's your problem?" I remembered that as I was doing that, and I was barely in the street, I saw the truck suddenly start to move. It was then that I realized this guy was going to try to run me over. The truck was driving straight for me. I ran back, but was only able to take about 3 steps. I then jumped and actually landed on the hood of my own car. The truck barely missed me, and luckily didn't hit my car either. After he had missed, I saw him slamming on the brakes up ahead. I quickly jumped into my vehicle and started driving away. The guy in his truck then started following me again as soon as he got the chance. He was once again right on my tail, but driving more reckless than before. I was driving on the street, but then went to the far side of the road. The man swerved after me, but went too far, and his truck ended up going off the road and into the ditch. It was a sort of big ditch. The truck didn't flip or anything, but it was enough to get him stuck. I kept driving and then called the police when I was a good distance away. They ended up locating the man, and he got a ticket for reckless driving, but I was unable to prove that he tried to run me over. I just hope I never see him again. One evening, as I was cruising down the road, I spotted this guy hitchhiking. Being the friendly and outgoing person that I am, I thought, why not give him a lift? I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Hey there, where are you headed?" I asked with a casual smile. The guy seemed a bit reserved, but still replied, "Just a few towns over, if that's not too much trouble." "No problem at all, hop in," I said cheerfully, unlocking the passenger's door as I did. He got in the car and buckled his seatbelt. I glanced at him and said, "I'm Jake, by the way. "What's your name?" I noticed he hesitated before answering. "Call me Max." The conversation started off pretty normal. We talked about the weather, music, and random stuff like that. But as time went on, things took a strange turn. Max began dropping small details of things I felt like I shouldn't know about. "So Jake, do you consider yourself a good person?" he said, his voice laced with a hint of intrigue. I laughed, thinking of how random a question it was, and replied, "Sure, Max, I like to think I'm a decent person." "Ah, interesting," he murmured. "You know, Jake, I believe that goodness is just an illusion. We all have dark thoughts inside of us that we chose to ignore because we lie to ourselves about who we are every day." I don't remember the exact words that Max used, but I'm trying to remember as best as I can, and it was definitely something along those lines. I was completely caught off guard by his response. "Well, I mean, everyone has their flaws and struggles," I said, trying to maintain a positive outlook. He laughed again, this time his voice had a completely different tone. "Oh, Jake, you don't understand. Beneath that friendly personality you're trying to keep with me because I'm a stranger, but deep down, we're all capable of terrible things. We have free will, and in this moment, we're free to do what we want." His words caused me to shift in my seat, as I was now extremely uncomfortable to be in my own car with this random guy. This conversation was taking a darker turn than I had expected. "But don't you think people can change?" I countered, trying to make him forget his train of thought with a new question. At this point, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm not changing anytime soon." It dawned on me that I never asked anything about him personally changing, and I realized that this conversation wasn't about his personal interest in me. It was about him and his problems. This was no ordinary hitchhiker. Max now had an edge to him that I hadn't noticed before. He was purposely pushing my boundaries, testing me to see how I would react. "Listen closely," he said. I could feel my heart pounding as he reached into his bag and pulled out a huge Bowie knife. I tried to keep my composure, but at this point, I had completely lost it. I had to think fast. "Listen closely. We both have free will. I choose to sit on the side of the road, waiting for some desperate lowlife like you to fall for my trap and pick me up, then proceed to lie about a town and identify that both don't exist. Now, it's time to see what choices you make." Before I could gather any thoughts on this new situation, the low fuel light illuminated on my dashboard. I didn't know what to do. Letting him know the car was out of gas could make him snap and do something right here and now, but it was also worth the risk of me being able to get to a gas station and find help. I made my decision and I spoke up. "Look, we need to find a gas station. The tank is nearly on empty. I'll allow you to get gas, but if you try anything like running or getting help, I will gut you from your head to your toes." He pulled up his phone and searched for the nearest gas station. I remember that we pulled into the parking lot of a Kwik trip, and I turned the car off. "Stay here," he warned firmly. "I'll fill up the tank, but don't try anything stupid." Then, he demanded my debit card to fill the tank, which I gave to him. As he got out of the car, I watched him through the back window while trying to scan the area for an opportunity for me to escape. As I stood near the car, I saw a huge coach bus pulling into the parking lot. The bus was filled with a bunch of high school or maybe college-aged kids who looked like they had just played a basketball game. I saw this as my big chance to get away from him while he was pumping gas on the opposite side of the car. Many of the kids were now getting off the bus to go inside the store, and I quickly opened the car door quietly and slipped out, trying my best to go over and blend in with the group of excited kids getting off the bus. I didn't want him to notice me leaving, so I tried to act like I was just another adult with the kids. The kids were laughing and talking loudly, which made it easier for me to go unnoticed. With my heart pounding in my chest, I walked briskly, trying to keep up with the kids, while keeping an eye on the gas station. As I moved through the crowd, I heard him scream suddenly, "Hey!" I quickly ducked through the door and got inside the gas station. There was commotion everywhere. There had been a bunch of people inside and out of the gas station at that point. I didn't look back, and just kept speed walking, and once I reached the back of the gas station, I knew I was in the clear. Then, I told multiple people to call the police and that there was a man with a knife in the parking lot. Quickly, an employee was able to go to the doors and lock them, and luckily the man hadn't attempted to go inside yet. The police came quickly. They were really nice to me and made sure that I was safe, as well as everybody else. However, when they got there, the man was gone. He had taken my car and drove away. Police promised to keep looking for him, but he and my car were never found.
This happened a couple of years ago. I was driving back home one night on a quiet road. There was a highway that I had recently turned off of to get to my house. I was still about 10 minutes away from home though. As I was driving along that road, suddenly my car started slowing down. I didn't know what was going on at first because my car always ran great. It was only a couple of years old at the time and never had any problems. Then I realized that I had ran out of gas. The light had come on earlier and I had simply forgot about it. My car came to a stop and I felt really stupid about making such an obvious mistake. My first thought was to call a friend and ask them to get me some gas. But when I took out my phone, I wasn't getting a signal. In this area, it wasn't that big of a surprise. I tried and tried for like 10 minutes, but it just wouldn't work. Plus, it was pretty late at night, almost midnight, so even if I could get my phone to work, my friends were probably asleep by now. I knew the area really well and knew that there was a gas station just about a mile away. It would be about a 20-minute walk, but the weather was nice, so I decided to just walk and get some gas and then bring it to my car. It really wasn't all that big of a deal. I got out of my car and luckily had a small gas container in the back. It was empty, but I kept it in my car mainly to buy gas for my lawnmower, so it worked out well that I had it in there. After getting out of my car, I started to walk along the side of the road. Now, the roads were very quiet. Since my car had ran out of gas, maybe 1 or 2 other cars had passed me by. I hadn't even really noticed. The road did not have a sidewalk or anything, so I was just walking a few feet off the shoulder in the grass. Surrounding the road on both sides was somewhat dense woods. I remembered that when I got a ways up from my car, I heard a car starting to come down the road behind me. It was coming from the opposite direction, back where my car was. I heard the sound of the car then slowing down, and I stopped to look behind me. I saw a pickup truck coming to a stop next to my car on the road. They were probably stopping to see if I needed any help. I turned around and thought about asking whoever it was for a ride to the gas station. What I saw, though, was a man hopping out of the passenger side of the truck and another guy get out of the driver's door. Then, they put what appeared to be ski masks over their face and approached my vehicle. I was confused and stopped, no longer wanting them to see me. And I'm pretty sure that they hadn't seen me and didn't know that I was there. They probably thought that I was still inside of my car. I moved back, closer to the woods, but kept watching. They looked inside of my windows. One of them used his phone as a flashlight to look in. The other guy knocked on one of the windows. They also tried opening all of the doors. After this happened, the guys looked in my direction suddenly for whatever reason. They seemed to notice me, because right after, one of the guys started walking over to me. The other walked back over to their truck. When I saw this, I turned to keep walking to the gas station. I heard the sound of one of the men running, and I looked back to see the first guy sprinting, and the other guy now inside of the truck, and began driving towards me. Now I had no other choice but to go into the woods. I darted to the right and went into the forest like a deer. I just started running like crazy, and it was really thick. There were all kinds of trees and bushes and branches. I heard the first guy start to enter the woods a ways back from me. I kept running though, not knowing where the woods led or anything. After probably 2 minutes straight of going as fast as I could through the woods, I reached the other side. I saw a house and a massive yard. I kept running and no longer heard the guy behind me. When I made it closer to the house, I ran behind it. There, I caught my breath and tried to figure out what I was going to do. At this hour, I did not want to knock on the front door of the house. I didn't think they would answer. I waited for several minutes and then carefully headed back down their driveway to the street. It was a really long driveway, and eventually, I got back to the street that I had been walking on. The men and the truck were nowhere in sight. I continued my walk to the gas station, but walked extremely close to the edge of the woods. That way, if I saw the truck coming, I could go back in. In fact, when I heard a car coming not long after I started walking again, I jumped into the woods. I hid and waited for it to pass. I couldn't tell if it was the truck or not, so I have no idea if it actually was, but I wasn't going to take any chances. Eventually, I did make it to the gas station. Then I walked back to my car, filled my tank with what I bought, and then made it home, after what was a very memorable night. Looking back, I don't know what those men wanted, or who they were. I'm really glad that I got away from them, though. This happened a couple of years ago. My best friend Jessica had recently moved into a new apartment. She invited me over to see it, and I was very excited for her. The previous place she lived in was an old dumpy house with a roommate that she did not get along with. This apartment was a much better situation for her. So I remember that night I worked sort of late. I had told Jessica that I would come over after work. It was probably like 8 p.m. and dark out. Jessica had gave me her address, which I put in my phone to get directions. Her place was in an area that I didn't go to that much, but it was only about 10 minutes away. After leaving work, I started to drive there, but just minutes in, my phone died. It was at that point that I realized I did not have a phone charger with me. I kept driving and was about 70% sure that I could get to her apartment on my own. I was trying to remember the route, but I was a little bit mixed up. I ended up turning either too late or too soon, I'm not even sure, but I was going on a highway, and I knew that there was an exit and then just a couple more turns before her place. So when I took the wrong exit, my next turn was also wrong, of course. After about 10 minutes of driving around there, I realized that I messed up and I went back. I took a few more roads and then realized that I was completely lost. Before making things worse, I decided to try to find a gas station or something. I drove around for a couple more minutes until I found one. Then I pulled in and parked. It was quiet, I remember, and my plan was to walk in and get directions. When I made it inside, I went to the clerk at the front counter. I started to ask him if he knew directions, and then mentioned the name of Jessica's apartment complex. He said that he wasn't sure, but just after that, another man walked over and approached me. This guy was a little bit taller than me, was bald, and had a slight beard. He asked me if I was trying to go to the apartment complex that I mentioned, and said that he knew exactly where it was. I said yes, and told him how my phone had died and I was trying to go there. The guy said that he would help me out. He grabbed some flyer that was in the gas station and then wrote directions for me on the back of it. He wrote the directions starting at the gas station that we were currently at and then gave them to me. I told him thanks, and then I walked out of the gas station and went back to my car. Now I was on my way again, and only about 10 to 15 minutes later than I would have been. When I got to Jessica's, I would be able to charge my phone. So I started driving, following the directions that the man had wrote for me. I don't remember exactly every turn, but I thought that it would just take me about 5 minutes. I mean, I knew that I was in the general area, but I was just confused on the exact streets. After like 10 minutes, I started to question things a little. The directions had taken me seemingly farther out into the country. For most of the drive to that point, there were businesses around or other apartment buildings. But now, I was driving on a road surrounded by just woods on both sides. There were just a couple more turns though, so I decided to follow the directions through. I made it to the next turn, which surprisingly went onto a dirt road. Then I made the final turn. When I did, I knew it was wrong. It led me to this driveway of a random house. It certainly was not an apartment complex. There was no apartment building in sight. I stopped at the end of the driveway and was wondering what was going on. I looked at the directions again, trying to figure out if I had read them correctly or if I had gone wrong. Just then, as I was reading them over, this car suddenly appeared behind me. The car parallel parked on the side of the road, but completely blocking the driveway that I was in. I thought that maybe it was the homeowner and realized how bad of timing this was. But then the driver's door opened. I saw a man get out and quickly realized that it was the same guy who gave me directions at the gas station. He started walking over to the passenger side of my car and was walking really fast. I put my car into reverse and quickly started backing up. When I did, I went onto the grass to go around his car. Luckily, I didn't get stuck and I made it around the car. The man ran back to his car, but when I made it into the street, I put my car in forward and drove away. I went down that street as fast as I could and luckily was not followed. I went to the next gas station that I saw and went inside. This time, I finally realized that I should buy a phone charger instead of asking for directions. I really wish that I would have thought of that the first time.
I was able to make it to Jessica's apartment not long after. I told her the story and we called the police and reported it. I believe the man intentionally gave me those directions to lure me to that property. I'm guessing it was his house. He also seemed to follow me the way back, even though I hadn't noticed. It really gives me the creeps to think back to it.
For the past year, I have worked a retail job in a popular shopping center area. It's about 15 minutes from where I live. This is something that took place about 6 months ago, but I don't think I will ever forget it. It all happened one Friday night as I was heading home after a long day. I think I worked until about 10 p.m., and to that point, it had been a very normal Friday. I live with my parents because I'm in college and 21 years old. I drove my car, which is a Ford Escape, to work and parked it in the large parking lot. I got to work at about 2 p.m. Then I was in there for the whole time. After getting out, the parking lot was now very quiet. I got inside of my car, texted my mom that I was on the way home, and then left. The first 5 minutes of the drive were completely normal. I was really tired and hungry, just focusing on the road ahead. But I heard a strange noise then, out of nowhere. I couldn't really tell what it was. I usually keep my car pretty clean, so I wasn't aware of anything that would be rattling around in the back, but I guessed that it could have been possible. I kept on driving and didn't think too much of it. But I heard a noise a couple of minutes later that was really weird. It was coming from the back of my car, and I thought that I must be going crazy. It was so bad that I slowed down significantly and looked behind me. The roads were basically empty at this hour, and when I looked back, at first I saw nothing. I looked back at the road, but then I looked to the back of my car again a few seconds later. That's when I saw something for sure. Something moved, just within my sight, coming from the back of my car. I looked again, and now saw a man emerge from the back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had to look back at the road to keep from crashing, but just moments later, when I looked back again, the man was now climbing over the seat up towards me. I started hitting the brakes, and the man rushed me. I remember that when he got to me, he grabbed the wheel, but didn't say anything. I barely remember what the guy looked like at all, because he was wearing this big winter hat over most of his head. Nobody else was on the road, and to the right was this little ditch. I was losing control and ended up taking the car into the ditch by accident. It wasn't like a big ditch or anything. There was no chance of the car to flip over. I barely even got any damage, but we did get stuck in the rough terrain that was there. The man had managed to get in the front passenger seat, and up until that point, my memory of it is kind of just one big blur. Everything happened so fast. When we finally came to a stop, I was going to get out and just run away. But to my surprise, before I could, the man opened up the passenger side door and ran out. He took off into the woods that was a ways over from the little bit of grass that we were in. I stayed in my car and locked the doors, then I called the police. As I was waiting there, I tried to drive my car out of the ditch, but it was stuck in there pretty good. I was afraid that the man might come back or something, but he didn't. The police got there a few minutes later, and I told them the whole story. They said that they would look for the guy, and a tow truck was called for me. I ended up making it home safe that night and was able to drive my car back. I never saw the man again. He must have gotten in the back of my car when I was at work. I guess either it was unlocked or maybe the back hatch wasn't closed all the way. I really don't know, but somehow he got in. Why he chose my car, I have no idea. I'm just happy that I'm all right. This happened during one really cold night in the winter. It was well below freezing, and I lived in an apartment and drove an older car. I had had the car for a long time, and I knew that I had to start the engine a lot in the winter. If it was really cold and I didn't start the car at least once a day, sometimes the battery would die. So on this night, it was especially cold, and I had used the car earlier in the day, but it had been hours. I didn't want to take any chances, so I decided that I would run the engine for a little while before I went to bed. Now, it was probably like 11 p.m. or so at this time. I left my apartment and walked outside to the parking lot. My car was parked in front of my building, and several other cars would park there as well. There was an underground parking garage, but it costed extra money each month to park there, and I didn't feel the need to get it. So when I got outside, it was very cold and very quiet. Even though I was wearing my winter coat, a warm hat, and gloves, I was still somehow freezing. It was even kind of hard to breathe with the wind blowing cold air in my face. I got inside of my car and started up the engine. It started, but it sounded like it just barely started. I realized I had definitely made a good choice on coming out here. Usually, I think you're supposed to run your engine for like 10 minutes or so at least, but I'm honestly not sure, and it probably depends on the vehicle. So as I sat there in my car, the heat obviously wouldn't work much until the engine warmed up a little. I was freezing, and I didn't want to sit there in my car for like 10 minutes, so I had the idea to go for a little drive around the area. That way, the engine would warm up faster due to driving, and I wouldn't just be sitting there bored. So I backed out and headed out of my apartment complex. My apartment has a little walking trail behind it, and then a woods, and on the other side of the woods is a neighborhood. In front of my apartment complex is a somewhat quiet road leading to a busier one. My plan was to just drive around maybe the neighborhoods behind my apartment for like 10 minutes and then go back. So after I left, I took a right, and then went down a ways and took another right. After going down that street, I was in the neighborhood over there. It was a lot of different roads with houses on them. Now, it wasn't like a super populated neighborhood. They had a little bit more space, with some woods and larger sized properties. I started driving down a few of these roads, and nobody else was out driving or anything, which was to be expected. I was mainly paying attention to the heat in my car, waiting for it to warm up. If I started to feel it warming up, that meant the engine was warming up. I remember that I was driving through an area between one neighborhood and another, where there was a lot of trees. That's when I saw a man emerge from a woods area, walking through the snow. He then stepped out onto the street and stood in my lane. He was a ways up, but I started to slow down. The guy was wearing a really big coat and was dressed for the weather. He had gloves and a hat, and what looked like snow pants on as well. He was just standing there in the middle of the road now. At first, I thought he was just going to cross the street, but he wasn't. It was unclear why he was standing there. It seemed pretty strange to even be out at this time and in this weather. I had to slow down all the way to a stop to wait for this guy. As I was stopped there on the road, he looked at me and kind of waved me over. The guy seemed sort of strange, and I wasn't sure what he was trying to get me to do. As I sat parked there, he began walking over to me. Then he walked to my driver's window as if he wanted to talk to me. I rolled my window down and was honestly surprised that that even worked. When the temperature got this cold, sometimes the window would be frozen shut. After my window rolled down, I thought that the man would talk to me and explain what he was doing out here or something. Instead, as soon as I rolled the window down, he started to aggressively reach inside of my car. It seemed like he was going for my keys in the ignition. As a reaction, I tried to bat his hand away. Then I stepped on the gas and went forward. The man had to take his hand out of my window, and I drove away from him with him standing on the side of the road. I figured that's enough driving around time for me, and I headed back to my place. I was extremely close to my apartment, just on the other side of it. I drove back around to the front and then entered the parking lot. Then I got back to my parking spot where I typically parked in. I turned the car off and got out. As soon as I did, I noticed the same man. He was coming out of the edge of the woods behind my apartment building. It was pretty far away, but the woods that he was coming out of was not very far at all from where I had seen him. I didn't realize that he probably could see where I was going, and I wasn't even that far away. I hurried and ran for my apartment door as I saw the man starting to walk closer to me. I made it inside and then went up to my place on the second floor. When I got up there, I went to my window and looked out into the parking lot. There, I saw the man was now standing at my vehicle outside of it. I watched him try to open the door, which was locked. I called the police and reported the incident. When I went back to the window, though, the man was gone. The police came out and talked to me and said that they would keep an eye out for the guy. Luckily, he wasn't able to break into my car or anything. I never saw him again after that. I'm not really sure what he was doing outside, but I'm really glad that I got away from him. This story happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was driving back from my friend's house late at night. He has an apartment that's only like 5 minutes away from mine. We hang out all the time at each other's places, and I've made the drive countless times. I think it was about 1 a.m., so when I left, the roads were extremely quiet. I didn't see any other cars. After I left the quiet road my friend's apartment was on, I would drive on this one busier road for about a mile. That road led right to my apartment complex, and all I would have to do is turn left. As I pulled onto the busier road, there weren't any other cars on it. I drove a little ways and came up to an intersection. There was a stoplight, and it turned red as I approached. One car was waiting to cross, and as I came to a stop at the red light, I noticed a man standing on the side of the road. He was in the middle, standing on the little concrete median in between the road that I was on and the one going the opposite direction. He was to my left, and I was in the left lane because I would go left into my apartment complex a little ways down the road. I thought it was a little weird for the guy to be standing there at this hour. He wasn't crossing the road either, because he could have done that at any time. He was just standing in the middle. As I stopped at the red light, the man was standing there on the median less than 10 feet away from me. The red light seemed to take forever. In reality, I was probably sitting there for like 30 seconds. That's when I could see out of the corner of my eye the man walking over to my car. I had no clue what he wanted at this hour. He soon stopped right outside of my driver's window and leaned over. Then he knocked. I rolled down the window just a crack. The guy asked me if I could give him a ride. This was really sketchy, obviously, and I said no. When I said no to him, he then moved directly back to the rear passenger side door to my car. Then he just opened up the door. I hadn't even realized that my doors were still all unlocked. He then got right in the back seat of my car. It all happened so fast. The next thing I knew, I felt the guy grabbing me from behind. He grabbed my right arm from the back seat and kind of pulled me backwards. Now, I'd like to say that I stayed there and fought him off and kicked him out of my car, but that's not what happened. I was terrified and just wanted to get away from him. After a brief struggle, I broke free of the guy. I opened up my driver's door and literally jumped out of my car. I scrambled up to my feet and sprinted out of there. Then I ran all the way back to my friend's apartment. Meanwhile, the guy was now alone in my car and he remained in there. I didn't really look back to see what he did though, if he drove away or what. When I got back to my friend's place, luckily my phone was still in my pocket and I called him. After he let me in, I called the police and they came to my friend's apartment. I spoke with the officer and filled out a police report. My car was then reported stolen and my friend gave me a ride home. I'm very fortunate that I did not have to go anywhere the next day. The very next night though, my car was found abandoned in a Walmart parking lot just 10 minutes away. I was happy to get my car back. There was no damage, but the inside was a little bit messed up. Still, it could have been so much worse, and I'm grateful that it wasn't. I don't know if that guy was ever found either. Looking back, I'm glad that I was able to get away from him. I don't know if he was trying to beat me up or rob me, or if he just wanted my car. Clearly, he didn't just want a ride though.
Late at night, while driving home in the rain, I found myself on a quiet county road. The storm was very aggressive and it was downpouring, so it was hard to see while driving. I was moving at a sort of slower pace because of this. As I was driving around a corner, I suddenly saw a man standing by the side of the road. Like I said, it was raining the hardest it had all year, and I wanted to make sure this guy was okay and not freezing himself to death. It would have sucked if he had a long way to walk wherever he was headed to. I slowed my car down to a stop, rolled down my window, and called out to the man, trying to understand why he was there. However, he didn't respond to me at all. Instead, he walked slowly towards the nearby ditch, as if he was lost in his own thoughts and unaware of me and didn't hear a single thing I said. I raised my voice, asking him once again what he was doing. The heavy rain and thunder made it difficult to know if he had heard me, but I kept on trying to get his attention. Still, he remained silent, disappearing into the literal darkness of the ditch. Confused on if I should follow him, I hesitated to get out of my car. I was raised with grandparents, and they always taught me to make sure that others are okay, so it was a no-brainer that I should go see if the guy was all right. After he vanished out of my sight, I couldn't stop feeling that something was off. I decided to step out of my truck and check and see if he needed any help. Rain was pouring down, making everything blurry and loud. I walked a few steps into the ditch, calling out to the man, hoping that he would respond. By now, I could barely see at all because of the downpour, and yet again, I only heard silence other than the rain and storm. No answer, no movement. About 30 seconds of waiting with no signs of him, I finally decided to head back to my truck and continue my way home. I thought there was no way the guy didn't hear me, and he must have just not wanted my help. I even walked a little ways into the ditch, but without seeing him, I returned to my truck. Driving back, my mind was filled with questions. I couldn't stop asking myself what the guy was doing out there. Was he in trouble? I really wanted to know. It was a strange situation for me to have been in. After about 30 minutes, I finally got home, and I started to feel a bit better at that point. I parked my truck and stepped out, but when I did, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Then, out hopped from my truck the same man who I had encountered in the ditch earlier. My heart pounded in my chest, and I started to back up with a panic, not knowing what to do. Without thinking, I sprinted towards my front door, desperate to get inside before the man could catch up. My adrenaline was pumping as I fumbled with the keys. I somehow managed to slip through the door just in time, locking it behind me. The man made multiple attempts to get inside by trying the door. He then pounded on the door, yelling me to let him in. I dialed the police, my voice trembling as I relayed the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way. Meanwhile, the man continued to bang on the door. Then, out of seemingly nowhere, the man gave up and disappeared, running off into the woods nearby. A short time later, the police arrived. I shared the details of the incident with arriving officers, and they went out searching for the man, but never found anything. I guessed that he had got in the back of the bed of my truck when I was in the ditch looking for him. It really creeps me out knowing he was with me the entire ride home. At the end of the day, I'm just glad I'm alright though.
I was driving home from work pretty late one night. I often worked late, and during this time would leave work at about 10:30 p.m. and get back home at about 11 or so. My job was in the city, and I lived a ways outside of it in a much more quiet area. After leaving my job, I would take a freeway back for most of the drive and then exit onto a highway. One time, when I was working earlier and there was a traffic jam, I found a shortcut to get home faster. It was a few more turns, but no stoplights, and in my opinion, easier driving, or at least driving that I liked better. Depending on traffic, it would either be slightly faster or slightly slower. On a night like this, when there was virtually no traffic because it was late, it was probably slightly longer, but I was in a habit of driving the shortcut route. It had started when I worked earlier shifts, and I got off when the roads were busy. On this night, I was taking some back roads to my house. These roads were very quiet, with some woods and occasionally quiet neighborhoods or people's houses on the sides. I was probably about 10 minutes away from my house. The roads that I was driving on were very quiet. I really wasn't seeing any other vehicles. This is exactly how I liked it, and it made for easy driving. As I was going down a straight spot in the road, I saw something up ahead. There was what looked like some kind of construction going on. As I got closer, I saw a few orange cones and then a person holding a sign on the right. It was one of those stop signs that lights up, and a construction worker holding it directs traffic. There was a man in an orange vest holding the sign and standing on the side of the road. Now, I was on a one-lane road. There was a lane for traffic going in the opposite direction as well. However, that lane was blocked by the two orange construction cones that were there. I began slowing down as I got closer. When I did, I was starting to wonder what exactly was going on here. There was only one person that I could see, the guy holding the sign. No other construction workers in sight. And other than the few cones, I didn't know what kind of work was being done. But still, I didn't pay it all that much attention. I was tired from a long day of work and just wanted to get home. I slowed my car down, and the guy was holding the stop sign, so I came to a stop. When I did, the guy holding the sign started walking into the middle of the road, right in front of my car. I remember that the guy was about average height, had long dark brown hair, and a bit of a goatee. When he started walking over to my car is when I started to really wonder what exactly was going on. The guy then stopped about a foot away from my car directly in front of it. He was just kind of looking at me, but not saying anything or communicating in any way. I was just sitting there with a puzzled look on my face. I saw the guy looking back behind my car, and I sort of saw something out of the corner of my eye in my side mirror as well. I looked back and saw another man. This guy was not a construction worker. He came from seemingly the woods on the side of the road. It was really bizarre. But even more strange was that this man was holding what appeared to be a baseball bat. He was approaching my car from behind and about 50 feet away if I had to guess. I wondered what on earth was happening. I just wanted to drive away. There seemed to be no real construction going on, and this whole thing was beginning to look like a trap. Meanwhile, the guy holding the sign was still there, stopping me from going. I rolled down my window just a crack and asked what was going on. The guy did not answer me. The man with the bat was still approaching from behind and now getting closer. I knew I needed to get out of there, and I suddenly put my car into reverse. I backed up just a few feet. When I did, the man with the bat was less than 10 feet away. Then I veered to the left extremely fast and swerved away from the man holding the sign. He tried to go in front of me, but was not fast enough, and I drove away. I ran over the 2 orange cones, but luckily they were the smaller kind. As I sped away from there, I saw the 2 men now standing together in the middle of the road. I felt lucky to have narrowly escaped that situation. Before I got home, I called the police and reported what happened. But I'm guessing by the time an officer got there, the men were gone. I continued to drive that same route home after that. It was just a routine that I didn't really think to change. Well, just about a week after the incident, I was driving home once again. It was around the same time, maybe 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. I came up to just about the same part on the quiet road. I could not believe my eyes when I saw the guy holding a stop sign again and the 2 cones on the road in the same exact spot as before. How could this be happening? As I got closer, I could see that it was the same guy. It was literally the exact same situation as the week prior. I did not slow down at all. In fact, I sped up slightly. When I got closer, the man took a step into the road and started waving his arm to try to get me to stop. I went to the left and into the other lane. I mowed down the 2 small orange cones and kept driving as the man stood on the other side of the road with his stop sign. I called the cops once again immediately after. That situation made me really angry how the guy was back out there in the same exact spot. I really don't know if they were found after that because I didn't hear anything about it. I also didn't see them again after that though. It was a trap, and I'm not sure exactly what the guy's plan was. Maybe it was to steal my car, or maybe something else. That area on the road where they had set up was a very quiet area. There were no houses, buildings, or anything like that in the immediate area. Plus, it was a long straightaway, so they could see who was coming from a long distance away. I'm hoping that they were never able to actually stop anybody.
This happened back when I was in college. It was just after my freshman year had ended. I was driving back home for the summer, which was pretty far away. The school that I went to was about a 10-hour drive from home. I hoped to make it home in one day, but things did not go as smoothly as I would have liked. Originally, I was going to leave the day after my final exams from my dorm room. I didn't have too much stuff and could fit it all in my car just fine. However, my exams finished a little bit earlier than I had expected, and I had the thought to leave just right then. I didn't really like my roommate that much, so I thought the sooner I left, the better. I left that day instead of waiting until the next. The drive was really long, but mostly just on freeways. By the time it was 10 o'clock at night, I found myself with still 3 more hours to drive. That's when I started getting extremely sleepy. The more I drove, the harder it was for me to stay awake. I knew that I wouldn't be able to make it home that night and would need to stop and rest. At that time, I didn't have enough money for a hotel room. I mean, I technically did have enough, but I didn't want to spend it. Being a college student, I didn't have much money, and I hadn't started my summer job yet. I figured that it wouldn't be a big deal if I slept for a couple of hours in my car. I'm not very big, and I could almost stretch out in the back. I put into my phone a search for rest area. I was hoping that there would be a place coming up soon that I could stop at, and thankfully, there was one just a mile up the road. I did my best to stay awake until then. I opened my windows, turned the radio up, and drank some water. None of that really seemed to help me much, but I was able to make it to the rest area. When I pulled in, it wasn't quite what I was hoping for. I'd been hoping to see a sort of large rest area with a decent-sized building and gas station, something with a lot of other people. What I saw instead was a very quiet and small rest area with just a little building that was probably just bathrooms and a couple of vending machines. There were only about 3 other cars parked along the long line of parking spaces. I drove down to the far end and parked my car. I was facing a small grassy area, and beyond that was surrounded by woods. This area was kind of creepy to me, but I was far too tired to really care that much. Most of my things were in the trunk, or my front passenger seat, but I did have a few bags of clothes in the back seat. I took a couple of pieces of clothing and covered the windows, but I was unable to cover the front window. Instead, I took a blanket and created a wall by hanging it over the front seats. By the time I was done doing that, I laid down and fell asleep almost immediately. My original plan had been to sleep for just a few hours. I didn't set an alarm or anything, but sleeping in the car, I figured I wouldn't be asleep for very long. I remember that when I woke up, it was still dark out. I didn't know what time it was, and I looked at my phone and saw that it was 1 a.m. Things were completely silent, but the silence was quickly interrupted by a noise. It sounded like footsteps that were very close by. I leaned over to the window my head was closest to, which was the back seat driver's side. When I looked out, I didn't see anything. I heard the footsteps, and they sounded like they were on the other side of my car, so I moved over to look out of that side. As I looked out that side, I saw there was only one other car in the parking lot in the rest stop, at the complete other end. I didn't see anybody though. Things just seemed a little bit strange. I saw from behind the blanket I had put up, somebody walked by the front end of my car. Now my heart started racing. There wasn't really a reason why somebody would be walking by my car all the way at this end of the rest stop. I closed my eyes and was completely still. Then there was a knock at my driver's window. I almost jumped up, but I didn't. I stayed there and was silent. All I wanted was whoever was there to go away. After they knocked, things were completely silent for a few seconds. Then whoever was there tried opening the driver's door. It was locked, and they went over and tried my rear driver's side door. I had my keys next to me in the back, and I was now wide awake at this point. I realized that I should drive away, but in going to the front seat, whoever was there would see me for sure. Then there was a loud bang on my window right by my head. I tore the blanket down, dividing the back seat and the front, and then hopped into the driver's seat of the car. I tried not to look out of the window, but then saw a man jump right in front of it. I didn't get a good look at him, but he was right next to my car, and it was terrifying. I started up the engine, and as soon as my car was running, I put it into reverse and backed up. When I did, the man started running alongside of me. I put the car into drive and sped away back onto the road. The man was unable to reach me again. I drove all the way home after that, only stopping to get gas once. I was wide awake the entire time after my experience. I ended up getting home at 5 o'clock in the morning, which was a really odd time to arrive back, but I was able to get some more sleep after that. I'm not really sure who the guy was messing around with my car, or what he wanted. I'm really glad I don't have to find out though.
I was driving home from work one night around 9 p.m. It was the middle of the week, so the roads were pretty quiet. As I was driving, I was going downhill, and I suddenly heard a noise that sounded like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I knew, a car went flying past me at least twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old and crappy car from what I saw. The car then started to wobble around, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill while the car spun out and crashed. It looked pretty bad, and once I got to where the car had crashed, I stopped my car to make sure that whoever was inside was okay. After I had parked, I looked to see that there was a man getting out of the car that had crashed. He got out and looked over at me. Then he started moving extremely quickly in my direction. I don't know why, but I hit my internal locks on the car. This was fortunate for me, because no more than 2 seconds later, the guy started grabbing at my driver's side door and smashing on my windscreen with his fists, trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off, headed back to home. After I had gotten back home, I decided to go back and see what had happened. When I arrived, I saw 2 fire trucks and about 4 police close to where the incident took place. They looked like they had it under control, and the guy was no longer there, so I decided to head home. The next day at work, I was bored and online reading the news when I saw an article that shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for an hour, and the police stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous. Turns out, the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour's drive away, and had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. he got into the taxi and stole it. In the process, he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door, and the driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver ended up dying from the incident. I called the police after this and had a detective assigned to me. He fingerprint checked my car and got a statement. I ended up having to testify in court, and the guy ended up getting 30 years for it.
This took place several years ago. It all started one night when I was driving home from work. It was rather late, I think a little bit past 10 p.m. My job back then was almost 30 minutes away, and I lived in a house that was a little bit out there. It was sort of far from the city, and lots of woods and country land. So this night, when I was driving home, I was on a quiet road just a few miles from my house. I saw a man on the side of the road sticking his hand out like he was hitchhiking. It was one of the most bizarre things that I've seen. It was just so unusual to see a hitchhiker there. I had never seen one before. How did the man get here if he was hitchhiking? There wasn't even a sidewalk. Obviously, I wasn't going to give him a ride, and I passed him. He did look at me and wave, and he really wanted me to stop, but I would have had to have been crazy to do so. Shortly after, I made it home. Now, fast forward a couple of days later, I was out driving again. I wasn't coming home from work this time, but instead went to the nearest grocery store to shop. It was nighttime, but not very late, maybe like 8 o'clock. As I was leaving the store and about to merge onto the highway, I saw the guy standing on a sidewalk. At first, I didn't remember him, but when I did, I couldn't believe it. He was still here in town. I was thinking, what are the odds of seeing this guy again? After that, I went home. Now, fast forward one more time to a few nights after that. I was coming back home from work late at night again. My work schedule was all over the place back then. I never really knew what time I would get off of work, and I was also scheduled at all kinds of different hours. It was very unpredictable. So I was driving home, and had made it all the way to my street. It's a very quiet street, and the yards are large and heavily wooded. The houses are spread out, sort of by a lot. It's a very nice place to live if you value privacy. But when I was driving down the street, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the hitchhiker again, and he was actively hitchhiking. He looked directly at me as I approached and was waving at me. The guy had a backpack on as well, and I actually almost stopped just to ask him what on earth he was doing out here. I knew he didn't live on my street, and I didn't think that he lived around here at all. If he did, I have no clue why he would be trying to hitchhike. I had a bad feeling about him, so I just passed him by. Just seconds later, I arrived home and turned into my driveway. I drove up and parked, and then got out and went inside. I was puzzled by the strange man, but I brushed it off. I didn't think about calling the police on him or anything. When I worked late, I would also stay up really late. For me personally, it takes me a while to unwind after getting home. It's rare that I can just get home and fall asleep just like that. So it was probably like midnight, and I had been home for a little over an hour. I was in the living room eating something and watching TV. For whatever reason, I glanced out the front window. When I did, I saw a figure out in the yard near a tree. When I looked closer, I noticed that it was the same guy. My front yard is large and partially wooded. The guy was near the woods separating my yard from the street. I watched him just standing there, looking in my direction. I had no clue if he could see me or not, because it was really dark and he was pretty far away. I looked away to grab my phone, ready to dial 911. When I looked back though, he was gone. Now, there were a million places that he could have went. I looked out of the window for several minutes, but saw no sign of him. I then went around just about every window inside of my house to see if I could locate the man. I couldn't see him though. I figured and also hoped that he had left my yard and went elsewhere. Who knows what this guy was even doing? I tried to return to watching TV to take my mind off of it, but it was difficult. I felt paranoid that the guy would return. I was looking out of the window like every 2 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, somebody tried opening my front door. I jumped up and immediately grabbed my phone again. I looked out of the front window and saw the guy was standing by the door. I moved away from the window and called the cops. Then I tried to make sure that all of my doors were locked and everything. I didn't bother trying to communicate with the man in any form. I was told that the police were on their way and would be there in just a few minutes. Eventually, I checked the windows again, but the man was gone. He was no longer at the front door. I went around to every window again without seeing him. The police got there a short time later, and I figured that the guy had gotten away. I told them his description, and they offered to search my property. To my surprise, they found the man in my yard. He was hiding out behind my shed. And even more of a surprise, it turned out that he was wanted in connection to a robbery. The robbery was in another city about an hour away. I'm guessing that the guy was trying to get out of here, but didn't have a car or any money. That must have been why he was trying to hitchhike. I'm not sure how long he was staying in my town, but he sure gave me the creeps. I'm really glad that I called the police when I did. This happened when I was driving home from work about a year ago. It was very late at night, and I was driving on a quiet road. It usually took me about 20 minutes to arrive back, and this drive was going just like any other. After I exit the highway, I drive on a quieter road for about 5 miles. This road has mostly wildlife on both sides. When I was driving on this road, I saw blue and red flashing lights up ahead. I assumed that the police had pulled somebody over or something. The closer I got, the more I could see. Soon, I realized that there was somebody also standing on the side of the road. This person was wearing a safety vest and looked sort of like a police officer. I slowed down and soon made it even closer. The car with flashing lights did not appear to be a police vehicle though. It seemed like a regular car, but just had the flashing lights on it. The man standing in the road started walking across as I got closer, and I slowed down even more. He then motioned for me to stop, so I did. I was very curious as to what this was. This particular area was very rural, and there was just kind of woods on both sides of the road at this point. After stopping, I rolled down my window to talk to the guy. He had dark hair and was wearing a black cap and a black jacket with the vest. He also had a flashlight and shined it at me, which was super bright. He said hi and then told me his name, but I forgot what it was. The man spoke kind of fast and told me that they were just conducting some searches around here. Apparently, it was going on in other nearby roads. I wasn't really sure what he meant, and I asked him why. He said because there had been some criminal activity in the area. I asked him if he was the police, and he told me no, he was not the police, but he said he was working with the police department. Then the man asked me if he had consent to search the back of my car, and told me to unlock the back doors and trunk. He started moving back, and was about to grab my back door handle. I said no, and then slammed my foot on the gas, driving away from him. I heard him telling me to wait as I left him standing there in the middle of the road. I knew the guy was clearly running some kind of a scam. Who knows what he was going to do if I unlocked the car for him? He didn't give me any real details, but just skimmed over everything. I immediately dialed 911 and reported him to the police. I was told that an officer would go to the location and check it out. After that, I finished my drive home. I made it back, and I really hoped that nobody else stopped for the guy. I'm not sure exactly what his plan was. To say there was illegal activity in the area was so broad. Unless he was talking about himself, it seemed like a terrible lie to get me to open my doors. Since then, nothing like that has happened, and I really hope that the police found the guy.
About 4 years ago, when I was in college, I went to a university that was about 2 hours away from my girlfriend's college. I would drive down to her campus sometimes on Friday afternoons, and then we would hang out for the weekend. I would typically leave to go back on Sunday night. Usually, I would try to leave by 10 p.m. at the latest on Sunday nights to get back to my dorm on campus by midnight. I had a 9 a.m. class on Mondays after all, but many times I would stay later than I should. One time, I stayed until nearly midnight and then began driving back to my campus. Unfortunately, not long after I started driving back, maybe like 20 minutes, I began to feel very sleepy. I kept going and hoped that I would feel more awake, but I was only getting more and more tired as I went on. I was starting to struggle to keep my eyes open, and obviously, it was becoming a very dangerous situation. Then, I decided that I needed to stop and do something to help myself wake up. Maybe get an energy drink or something. I kept my eyes open to the sides of the road to see if I would pass by any gas stations or rest stops. I knew that I wouldn't be able to make it much farther without falling asleep. At the next exit, I took it, and I hoped that I would come across something. The exit led me down to a quiet road, and not too far down it appeared to be a gas station. I was really happy to see it. I pulled into the parking lot, but when I did, it appeared that the store part of the gas station was closed. The lights were off inside, and there were no cars in the parking lot whatsoever. I even got out and tried the door, but it was locked. I went back to my car then and got inside. I was still extremely tired. That's when I just sat back and closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking all that clearly from being so tired, and I guess I felt that maybe I could take a brief 15-minute nap or something. All I know is when I closed my eyes, it felt so good. I started to drift off to sleep, and I was out within probably 15 seconds. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to see a car was parked next to me. I was groggy, and I almost went right back to sleep at first, but I had a bad feeling. The feeling was almost like I needed to get away from there, and I was in danger. I looked at the car that was parked next to me. It was a silver sedan, and it looked to be about 20 years old or so. Then, the driver's door opened. I felt a little bit suspicious because they parked right next to me out of all the other spaces in the parking lot. I could barely see the person as they walked around the car over to mine. When they made it around, I finally saw them. It was a man wearing a white sweatshirt with his hood up, and he had on like a type of mask that covered his whole face. It was like a costume mask of some sort, but I didn't recognize the character. When he approached my driver's window, I had no interest to stick around. I started my car up right then, and as I did, the man attempted to open my driver's door. My door was locked though, and I put my car into reverse and then backed up and drove away from him. I saw him then start sprinting back to his car as I was speeding out of the parking lot. Suddenly, I was wide awake and I didn't feel like sleeping at all. I sped onto the road and then back onto the freeway. I wasn't driving recklessly or anything, but I was definitely pushing the speed limit. When I got back onto the freeway, I saw that a car was merging right behind me, which happened to be the silver car. I had no plans to try to outrun them, and I drove at a normal pace. The guy sped up until he was right behind me. He got within probably 5 feet of the back of my car, and he stayed at that pace for a good minute or so. There were no other cars on the freeway at all. This area was really not that populated. In fact, most of the drive from my girlfriend's college to mine was just farms and woodland. I don't think I had seen another car the entire time that I was on the freeway. I sped up just a little bit, and as soon as I did, the guy behind me did as well. I switched lanes back and forth once, and he did the same. Then he sped up and hit the back end of my car. I couldn't believe it. He then crashed into it again, but this time harder. I think this guy had to be crazy or something. Then he backed off, and then went forward and hit me for a third time. This time, it was so hard that I nearly lost control of my car entirely and spun out. I sped up then because I was desperate. But as I did, I noticed way up ahead that there appeared to be a semi-truck. I kept speeding up, and so did the guy behind me. When we got sort of close to the semi, the guy behind me then switched lanes and sped off, passing both me and the semi-truck. He probably went over 100 miles per hour when he passed the truck. I slowed back down again once I made it to the semi-truck. The truck honked at me, probably seeing the damage on the backside of my car. I slowed down more and then called the police about the situation. I'm not sure why I didn't think to call the police sooner, but it's probably best, or I might have crashed or something trying to handle the phone and driving. An officer came out and pulled me over, where I was able to give my side of the story. He had me take the next exit and then stayed with me while I called my roadside service. I basically ended up staying up all night from waiting for my car to get towed and everything. I'm not sure whatever happened to the driver of the other car, whoever he was. I would recommend everybody to not drive late at night unless you have to, and especially never drive if you're tired.
This is something weird and kind of creepy that happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. It was a Thursday night, and I had just gotten done with some shopping. I went to a couple of stores to get groceries and some other things after work. By the time I left to go home, it was probably like 9 p.m. I drove on the highway for a few miles and then exited to a quieter road. When I was on this road, I was just driving like usual, and out of nowhere, the car behind me honked. I looked back and saw just headlights in the dark of what appeared to be just a regular old sedan. At first, I wondered if they had in fact honked at me. There were no other cars around though, so it had to be them. It was really weird though, because I didn't know of any reason why they would honk at me. I was just driving down the road at a normal speed. In fact, I checked my speed. I was going like 58 in a 55, so I was driving around the speed limit. Did they think that I was going too slow? I know for a fact that I hadn't cut them off or anything. Maybe whoever was driving accidentally bumped the horn. I've almost done that myself a few times. About a minute went by, and then they honked at me again. Now I was even more confused than before. They were driving behind me sort of close, not right on my bumper or anything, but decently close to me. A few seconds later, they honked once more. I started to pull to the side of the road to let them pass me, but when I did, the car behind me did the same thing. Was it somebody that knew me? I couldn't tell who was driving and didn't recognize the car, but clearly they were not passing me and wanted to be behind me for some reason. They honked again as we were now driving less than 40 miles per hour and near the side of the road. I went back onto the road and sped up again. They did the same. I really didn't know what this person was doing. The only thing that I could think to do was just keep driving home. By this point, it was only a couple of minutes away. The car behind me honked several more times before I made it to my street. When I turned onto the street where my house was, the car behind me followed. This made me kind of nervous, and I still didn't know what was going on. When I got to my house, I pulled into the driveway. The car followed me and also pulled in right behind me. Now I was worried. I still couldn't tell who was driving the car because it was dark out. I stayed inside my car and did not want to get out. The person back there could be dangerous or something. I thought that they were going to get out of their car. I wasn't really sure what to do if they did though. Maybe they would explain why they had been honking at me. Possibly there was a logical explanation. Maybe my tire was going flat or something, and they wanted to make sure that I got home safely. I knew that probably wasn't the case though, but I was being hopeful. A few minutes went by, and I remained in my car, and surprisingly, so did the other person. After probably 5 minutes, all of a sudden, the car backed up quickly. It made it out into the street and then drove away. Then I got out of my car and looked around. None of my tires were flat or anything. My car seemed just fine. I went inside and was really confused by the situation. Since then, I haven't seen that car at all. I still wonder though, who it was and what they wanted. I work a job that requires a lot of late nights. The hours are different a lot of times, but I often get off a little bit later. I'm used to driving home at late night hours or even in the very early morning. The nice part about this is that the roads are very quiet and there's no traffic at all. I work a little bit outside of a major city and I live about 20 minutes away. Where I live is much more country, and I drive through some stretches of road with woods on both sides when I get closer to my house. One night, I got off of work at a little bit after midnight. I left and drove home in my car, which is a pretty standard SUV. It was a quiet and calm night. The roads were mostly empty and it was an easy drive. I got to within 5 minutes of my house or so and was driving on a very quiet road. It had one lane going in my direction and another lane going the opposite direction. There was really not much of a shoulder on either side and just a slight ditch before there was woods on both sides. As I was driving down the road, my headlights provided the only light. Soon, I saw what appeared to be something running into the road up ahead. It was very sudden and it caught my attention. A normal thing to see at this time and location would be a deer crossing, but I knew instantly that it wasn't a deer. It looked to be a man. It was really far away, just within my view. I drove closer but slowed down. Soon, I saw that it was in fact a man who appeared to be dressed in all black. He stopped and was now standing right in the middle of the road facing me. I was wondering why on earth a man would run out from the woods and stop in the middle of the road. I continued to drive closer, but was now going extremely slow. Soon, the man was right in front of me. I saw that he was also wearing a black ski mask. This looked really suspicious. He was standing right in the middle of my lane, so I turned to the left to go into the oncoming traffic lane and go around the guy. Nobody else was on the road at all, so it didn't really matter. As I did, the man then walked to the left, blocking my way. I then turned back to the right, and the man responded by going back to the right. When I made it within maybe 10 feet of him, it seemed as though he was not going to let me get past him, and I came to a complete stop. He didn't seem like he needed help or anything either. He He wasn't waving his arms and calling anything out to me. He was just silently standing in the middle of the road trying to block me. I came to a complete stop, and when I did, the man slowly started approaching my vehicle. I knew this wasn't good, and my instincts were telling me to get out of there. So I put my car into reverse and started backing up. The man kept walking closer to me and started walking faster as well. I moved faster in reverse, but really wasn't all that great at driving backwards. The man started to run when I got up to a higher speed. Now I knew that I really needed to get out of there. I decided to try and turn around my car. I turned my wheel to the right, causing my car to almost go off the road. Then I stopped and turned to the left and put my car into drive. In the brief moment that I was completely stopped, the man who had been running after me caught up to my car. I remember first he tried opening up the passenger side door, which was locked. Then he pounded on it like twice before I sped out of there. I watched in my mirror as he ran a couple of steps after me, but clearly wasn't going to catch me as I sped off. Then he was standing in the middle of the road again before he quickly went out of my sight. I decided that I would take another way home and did not want to pass by that area again. I called the cops and told them about what had happened. Most likely, though, when they got there, he was probably gone. I made it home just about 10 minutes later, and after that day, drove my normal way home. When I pass that spot, I still sometimes worry that somebody will come out of the woods again, but nothing like that has happened since. I'm not really sure what that man wanted, but I'm glad that I got away from him.
Several months ago, I was driving back home late at night. By this time, the roads were very quiet, with not many other cars. I was driving on a typical busy road that's very close to my apartment. I was maybe a mile away from home and approached the red light of an intersection. I was not paying that well of attention to my surroundings, but I guessed that there was a guy standing on the side of the road, because as I sat at this red light, I remember noticing somebody appear to walk over to my car. I looked over, and a man approached my driver's window. He walked right up to it and then leaned in. I rolled down the window just a crack, wondering what this man wanted. When I did, he did not immediately say anything. I said hi and asked what the man was doing. He still didn't answer me, but then knocked on my driver's window. I was confused, but I was also getting more and more suspicious of the guy. Right then, the light turned green. I was so happy to see that, and I instantly drove away from the man. I watched him sort of return to the side of the road as I drove off. It was a pretty strange experience, but I saw the guy again just a few nights later. Once more, I was driving home late at night, and I came to the same stoplight as before. It turned red, and after I stopped, I once again saw the guy walking over to me. I didn't know where exactly he had come from. Each time when I had approached the light, I didn't see the guy standing on the side of the road or anything. So he walked over to me like a few nights prior to this. After arriving at my driver's window, he knocked on it again. This time, I didn't roll it down at all. I just ignored the guy and hoped that the light would save me and turn green like it had the last time. There really weren't any other cars around besides one that was turning in the intersection. The guy was just standing there, and then all of a sudden, I heard this loud bang at my window. I looked over and saw the man swinging something at it. I really couldn't tell what it was. It was maybe some type of a club. It wasn't very long, but it was obviously creating a very loud noise. He swung it twice more before I left. The last hit cracked my window, but luckily it did not shatter. One more hit to it though, and it would have. I stepped on my gas pedal and went through the red light. Luckily, there were clearly no other cars around. The man stood there in the road and didn't try to come after me. I then dialed 911 on my cell phone and called the police. I reported what happened and where it happened. Then I went home. For several weeks after that, I avoided going through that intersection. I didn't know if the guy just hung out around there or what. I later found out, though, that there had been several other reports of the man in that same area. Apparently, he had approached other drivers and attempted to break in or just cause problems. Somehow, he never seemed to be caught. Since it happened, though, I haven't seen him, and I just recently started going through the intersection again.
This happened just last week. I was traveling back home after visiting some family for a few days. I lived about 6 hours away and had to drive through 3 different states to get back home. I left at about 9 a.m. and figured to get home at about 4 or 5. About an hour into the drive, I realized I was almost out of gas, so I stopped to fill up. As I did, I noticed a white car with a red stripe down the middle of it getting gas as well. When I was done, I left and went on with the drive. A while later, I noticed that the white and red car was right behind me. This wasn't a big deal at all, and as I went on with the drive, I was occasionally seeing it. I had to change roads a couple times, and the car remained behind me. It was starting to drive directly behind me constantly. When I would switch lanes, the car would immediately switch lanes as well. I looked to try to see who was driving. Whoever it was appeared to be wearing sunglasses and a hat, so I couldn't really tell, but it looked like a man. After I got about an hour from home, the car had still been following me almost the entire time, and it was starting to concern me. I decided to stop at the next exit there was to see if the car would stop as well. There was a rest stop, and I took the exit for it. When I did, the car continued to follow me and took the exit as well. I wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted. I didn't think I had cut them off or anything like that. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. So I parked at the rest stop, and the car parked about 5 spots away. I waited to see if the driver would get out, but they didn't. After a little while, I decided to just leave, but as soon as I did, the car left as well. When I was leaving the parking lot to go back onto the freeway, the car got so close to me for a second I thought it might bump me. I kept driving until I got to the exit to where I lived was. At this point, I knew I was being followed, and I didn't want to go home, so I thought of the idea of going to the police station. I drove to my city and got to the police station about 10 minutes from my house. As I pulled in, the car also did. I sat in the parking lot of the police station, and the car parked about 10 spots away. After being there less than a minute, the car drove away. When it did, I got the idea to look at its license plate, but it was too late and I couldn't get a decent view of it. I waited in the parking lot for 10 more minutes before I finally left to go home. I looked behind me almost the whole time I was driving to make sure I wasn't being followed, and thankfully I wasn't. I finally got home and got inside. I thought at that point I would never see the car again, but I was wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night for seemingly no reason. I didn't hear any noise or anything. I was wide awake though, so I just took a glance out my window. Nothing was there. Then about 10 seconds later, I saw a car pull onto my usually quiet street. It was the same car that had been following me before. I knew it was the same car because of the red stripe it had, which is fairly uncommon. The car drove very slowly down my street. As it got to my house, I ducked down and hoped it wouldn't stop. It kept going and drove away past the end of my street and onto another one. I wasn't able to fall asleep for another hour. This was just last week, and I'm hoping the car doesn't come back.
Back when I was in college, years ago, I had several really late nights doing homework. This wasn't something that I did on a regular basis, but just a few times during projects or things like that. Well, one time I had this really tough project for one of my classes. The good thing is that I had one of my best friends in the class, and we were project partners. So one time I went over to my friend's house, which was a little ways off of campus. I lived in a different college house with a couple of roommates that was about a 5-minute drive from there. So we had a really late night working on the project. I stayed there until about 2 o'clock in the morning, but we finally finished. Then I was able to leave and went to drive back to my house. When I left my friend's place, I walked out to my car and started driving home. By now, the roads were very quiet. In fact, I didn't see any other cars for the first minute or so. But then, right after I turned onto a road, I remember seeing headlights behind me. I continued to drive back and noticed that a car was following me really close. I wasn't driving particularly slow or anything, so I thought that it was kind of strange. but when I made a few more turns, the car stayed with me. When I had made it pretty close to my house, I was suspicious that I was being followed. I didn't know who was driving this car behind me, but with it being so late at night, I had a bad feeling about it. When I had made it to my street, I started pulling over to the side of the road, sort of in front of my house. We did not have a driveway, so you would just have to park out front. So I pulled over, and when I did, I saw that the car behind me was pulling over as well. I knew this wasn't any of my roommates. I thought about getting out of my car and going inside, but decided not to. So instead, I just sat there inside my car and waited to see what the car behind me would do. Within a few seconds, the driver's door opened. I looked in my mirror and saw a man step out and begin walking in my direction. I did not recognize this guy and had no idea who he was. He was walking at a fast pace straight for me on my driver's side. I had a bad feeling about it, and right when the man was about to reach my door, I hit the gas pedal. I peeled off pretty quickly, and in my mirror, saw the man start sprinting back towards his vehicle. I knew that I had to be fast, so I went to the end of my street and then took a right. Then I took a left very fast into another residential street. I was able to get a decent amount of distance on the guy and couldn't see him behind me, but I also knew that we were about the only two cars out driving right now, so I did my best to keep getting farther away. I turned at a couple more streets, and then there was a gas station. I turned into the gas station parking lot and then went behind the building into the lesser used side with a few parking spaces. After parking, I turned off my headlights. Then I sat there and waited. I could see a few residential roads nearby. A few moments later, I sort of saw a car driving. I think that it was the guy, but he didn't come that close. I kept waiting there in the gas station parking lot for a few more minutes. I figured the guy would still be out there looking for me, but luckily he didn't go to the gas station. Then I turned my headlights off and carefully drove back home. I knew the way back to my house easily and really didn't want the guy to see me. I was able to make it back okay and parked and then quickly went inside. Luckily, the car did not come back. I've always wondered though, why he followed me. I mean, I don't even know who the guy was. I'm almost 100% sure that I didn't cut him off or anything like that. It was 1 o'clock in the morning and nobody else was around. I guess I may never know.
About 2 years ago, I was driving home from the store sort of late at night. I lived a little bit out in the country, not a lot though, but enough so that the closest grocery stores and restaurants were about 10 minutes away. After shopping at 2 different stores and getting groceries, I left to go home. Everything was fine and normal until about 5 minutes into the drive when I was about halfway home. I was driving on a quieter road and not many other cars were around, but I suddenly noticed that a car was behind me and it kept driving closer to me until it was right up on my bumper. The speed limit on that particular road was 55 miles per hour, and I was going almost 60. The car could go into the other lane to pass me if he wanted, because there were no other cars coming in that direction, but he didn't do that. Instead, he just followed me at an extremely close speed. I knew he had been driving behind me for a time at a distance because I remember seeing the headlights, but I had no idea how long exactly he had been behind me because I hadn't really been paying attention. I just really noticed when he started to drive super close to me. All I could tell was the car looked like a regular average car, similar to the one I had. I couldn't see who was driving or anything like that because of how dark it was. I sped up a little bit, and so did the car behind me. Eventually, I had to turn, and I got into the turn lane. I was hoping this would be the end of the guy following me, and I thought maybe it was just an impatient driver, but then they got into the turn lane as well. The car then followed me down the next road, and I decided to turn onto a random quiet road. They did the same thing, and after that, I circled the road onto another one leading back to the busier road I had been on. I was followed the entire time. That's when I got a pretty good idea that I was being tailed. I had no idea why somebody would do this though. I didn't think I had cut anybody off or done anything wrong. There really hadn't been much cars out on the roads that night either. I decided that I would drive to the police station, which is something I had heard to do if you're being followed. I got out my phone and put in police station on the maps. I saw the closest one and got directions to go there. It took me maybe 5 to 10 more minutes to get there, and I was followed the entire time. Finally, I pulled into the police station parking lot. The car behind me put its turn signal on to follow me in, but instead turned it off at the last second and kept going. I was relieved to see this, and I waited in the parking lot for a good 5 minutes before I decided to leave. I was very careful going home, even taking a long way to get there, and made sure I wasn't being tailed or anything. I was finally able to make it back to the quiet street that I lived on, but when I made it to my driveway, I suddenly realized that there was a car already parked in the driveway with the lights off. It certainly wasn't my car, and it looked like the same one that had been following me. Suddenly, I was freaking out, and I didn't even turn into the driveway. Instead, I drove down the street, turned around in a neighbor's driveway, and then drove away. As I passed back by my driveway for the second time, I noticed the car's lights suddenly turn on. I really didn't want to be followed again, and I sped away, turning immediately out of my street onto a busier road. I was able to leave and make a few quick turns, and did not notice the car following me. I went right back to the police station that I had been at before, and this time I went inside, talking to an officer about what was going on. I ended up driving back home with an officer following me in his car. When I got back home, the car that was in my driveway was now gone. I was told if I saw it return or saw anything strange at all, to give them a call, but after that, I never did. I always wonder to this day who that was and how they knew where I lived.
I live a little bit out in the country. Most of the roads near where I live are very quiet and surrounded by woods or farmland. There's a highway that goes out into more civilization, but other than that, I mostly travel on quiet roads. One time, I was driving back home at a little bit after midnight. I'm usually not out that late, but I believe it was a Friday or else a Saturday, and I didn't have work the following day. I had given a friend a ride home from a local bar. And just to show how rural things are out here, the local bar is almost 10 minutes away from my house. So I had already dropped off my friend at his house, and I was on my way back to mine. I was traveling west on a road that was not far from where I lived. I maybe had 5 minutes left before getting home. As I drove down this road, I suddenly heard the sound of something hitting my car. I couldn't tell what it was or what happened, but the impact was somewhat significant. It was so weird that I slowed down and then pulled the car over. I looked around, but it was really dark and mostly woods were surrounding me on both sides. After I had stopped, I got out of my vehicle and started to examine it. It almost sounded like a rock had hit the backside of my car, but I hadn't seen anything. I walked around, and when I got to the rear passenger side, saw a dent. It was a little bit above the wheel, and it did appear as though it was possibly a rock that had hit my car. But where had it come from? Just as I was thinking about that, I looked up. About 100 feet back, maybe a little bit less, there was a man standing in the road. He looked like he had just come out of the woods. As soon as I saw him standing there, he threw something at me. The guy had a pretty good arm, to be honest. I saw what looked like a rock flying towards me. It missed just a few feet to the left and went into the woods. But I now knew what had hit my car and how. The only question left was why. But I didn't want to wait around and ask. I ran around my car to the driver's side and got back in. When I got to the driver's door and was getting inside, I noticed that the man was now in a full sprint. He was running towards me, and I put the car into drive and sped out of there. The man had made it to within probably 20 feet of me when I left. I don't know what he had planned on doing. I got home and then called the cops. After that, I haven't experienced a situation like that since. It's just so bizarre to me, because I don't know why anybody would do that. I also don't know why anyone would be out there. It was a rural stretch of woods on both sides of the road. I'm hoping that that guy doesn't try doing that to anybody else.
I used to work at a bar, and the story takes place during that time. Because of the job, I would typically work really late into the night. One time, I got done at almost 3 o'clock in the morning. It was maybe a 10 to 15 minute drive back, which was not too bad at all. All of the roads that I would take were also very quiet roads, like no highways or freeways. When I left work that night, though, I had completely forgotten about the fact that I needed gas. The light had come on while I was driving to work, but I didn't stop, and instead told myself that I would get gas on the way back. Unfortunately, it had been a long day and it never came to my mind. For some reason, I didn't even pay attention to the light on the dashboard. So when I was about halfway home, my car stopped running. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, and I knew before I was even fully stopped that I had ran out of gas. I felt so stupid for not getting it earlier. I was on a very quiet road and hadn't seen another car at all. The area that my car was stopped in was covered in dense woods on both sides, but I knew that there would be a gas station coming up ahead. I had driven the route to and from work many times, and I believed the gas station was about 1 mile up the road. It would take me probably 15 to 20 minutes to walk there, but I didn't see what other option I had. I couldn't call somebody I knew because they would all be asleep at this hour. Things were very quiet. I opened my car door and heard a few crickets chirping in the night. Then, I went to the back and got out my gas container. I was a little bit creeped out with having to walk along the woods for so long. I walked around my car to the front of it and then got on the shoulder of the road and began walking. When I had made it maybe 10 feet in front of my car, though, I heard a noise in the woods. It sounded like maybe an animal or something, at least 20 feet into the woods and a little ways up. Judging by the sound, though, it had to be a pretty big animal, or maybe even a person. It startled me a little bit, and I stopped and looked into the woods to see what it was. It was really dark, but I barely saw some leaves and branches moving in the woods. I couldn't see what it was, though. The noises continued, and then slowed down and stopped. I remained where I was, listening and watching the area of the woods that I had heard the noises from. Now it was just silent again. I found it pretty strange, but I decided to keep walking towards the gas station. When I did, things were quiet at first, but when I made it maybe 100 feet more, I heard the noises again. They were now way behind me and near my car, but still in the woods. I turned around and looked behind me to see what appeared to be a man emerge from the wooded forest and approach my vehicle. He appeared to be holding some sort of stick in his hand. I started to walk back, and I shouted at him, asking what he was doing and saying that that was my car. The guy was like 5 feet away from my car, and he then turned and looked at me. I was far away, but the guy looked crazy. He then turned his whole body to face me and started sprinting at me with a stick still in his hand. I started running. There was nothing else to do in that situation. I ran as fast as I possibly could to get away from him, and thankfully, I had a pretty good head start of around 100 feet. When I had ran full speed for as long as I possibly could, I slowed down and didn't hear the man behind me. I turned around and didn't see him. I was running so fast I wasn't really paying attention to hear if he was behind me. Plus, he had been so far back. He must have stopped chasing me and went back into the woods or something. I walked quickly all the way up to the gas station and finally made it. Unfortunately, the convenience store part of the gas station was closed, but the pumps were still open at least. I was able to get a few gallons of gas in my small container. Then, I turned back around and headed to my car. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty nervous to have to walk back, and the whole time I was fearing that the man might pop out of the woods at any moment. I walked as fast as I could with the gasoline in my hand, and it took me probably about 15 minutes. Finally, I could see my car again, but as I got closer, I realized that there appeared to be glass on the ground. When I made it back, I saw my driver's window and the back window of the car were both smashed. I looked inside, and nothing was out of place, not that I had much in the car anyways. I was furious, but also felt sort of scared. I began to open the fuel cap and start to put the gasoline in the car. That's when I suddenly heard more noises in the woods. They were pretty far back, but were getting closer. I hurried as fast as I could to pour as much gasoline in my tank as possible, and then ran to my driver's door and got inside. I then started the engine and sped away from there, seeing the man emerge from the woods again in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. I drove back home and called the police about it. My insurance was thankfully able to cover the window despite the crazy situation. I don't know if the police ever found the guy though. I also wonder what his plans were and what he was doing out in the woods in the middle of the night.
The scariest experience I've ever had in my life took place about 5 years ago. It all started when I was driving home late at night. It was a little bit past 11 p.m. and I was still about an hour away from home. I was driving on a rural road out in the country a little bit. There was farmlands and woods in the surrounding area and not many cities or businesses nearby. At the time, I drove a car that was almost 20 years old. It had some problems, and I had been meaning to buy a new car, but I just hadn't gotten around to it yet. I was really busy with work and stuff, and car shopping can be a hassle. But on this night, as I was driving along a quiet road, my car started to break down. I didn't know what the problem was at the time, but it turned out it was an alternator going bad. This caused the battery in my car to die, and my engine felt like it was losing power. Soon, I realized that I would have to pull over and call my roadside service. But when the car came to a complete stop and I took out my phone, I wasn't receiving any kind of a signal. It didn't really surprise me, given the fact that I was kind of in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't sure what to do. It really didn't look like there was any gas stations or businesses nearby. I also didn't see any houses immediately nearby. To my right was a little bit of trees and woods, and to my left was just a big field. I restarted my phone and kept trying it, hoping that somehow I would get a signal. I didn't know enough about cars to try and work on it myself. Meanwhile, I hadn't seen another car on the road at all. The thought of trying to hitchhike did come into my mind, but I quickly pushed that thought away. I knew how dangerous that could potentially be. There had to be a better way for me to get out of this situation. My thinking at the time was to let my car sit for a while and try to start it again in about 10 minutes. Again, I didn't know what the problem was at the time. I thought maybe it was overheating or something, and I could let it cool down. I probably sound dumb to anyone that's a car expert, but clearly I'm not one. Plus, I was only 20 years old and basically a kid. As I sat there alone in the dark and quiet night, I couldn't help but feel really creeped out. I only heard some crickets and frogs in the distance. There was no streetlights or anything either, so it was very dark out. As time went on, I was starting to get a little bit paranoid. Then, about 5 minutes later, I saw headlights of another car coming down the street from behind me. I looked back, and as they approached, I saw that it was an older-looking sedan. This car had to be at least 25 years old, so it was even older than mine. I expected the car to drive right past me, but I noticed that the car was going slower and significantly slowed down when it got close to me. I didn't know whether to feel nervous or relieved, and I can tell you right now that I was feeling a lot more nervous. Sure enough, the car pulled right in front of me to the side of the road and then stopped. Then the driver's door opened and a man got out. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s and started approaching my vehicle. I opened my door and got out. He asked me what the problem was, and I said I wasn't sure, but my car just broke down. The man said that he knew of a gas station just a couple of miles up the road and offered to give me a lift. I really didn't want to accept a ride from a stranger. I told him no thanks and said all I really needed was a phone. I asked to borrow his cell phone to call my roadside service. The man told me that these areas had weak signal and that wouldn't work because he couldn't get any signal here either. I thought about what to do. Then I asked the man exactly how many miles it was to the gas station. He said about 4 or 5. If I walked there, it would probably take me about an hour just to get there and then another hour to get back. I realized that it made a lot more sense to just accept the ride from the guy. Chances are he would be fine and a good person. Although for some reason he just gave me a bad feeling immediately. Reluctantly, I accepted his offer, and he told me to get in the passenger side of his car. When I got inside, I saw that the car was in fact very old. I'm not sure exactly what kind of car it was, but it was probably from the 1980s. It smelled badly of cigarettes, and there was a bunch of empty beer cans in the back, which did not set me at ease in the slightest bit. I buckled up and thanked the man for giving me a lift, trying to make good conversation. He said no problem and then began driving. For the first part of the drive, though, he didn't say anything. I wasn't really sure of anything to say either. I was feeling kind of awkward and nothing was coming to my mind. We kept driving down that road and it was more of the same scenery, just trees and wildland on both sides. After at least 5 minutes, I figured that we would have to come up on a town or something, but we didn't. I finally had the courage to speak and asked the man if the gas station was coming up. He said yes, and it would be pretty soon. I remember that I asked him what kind of gas station it was for some reason, and he said he wasn't sure. At least another couple minutes went by, and I was feeling that something was off for sure. We hadn't passed any gas stations or anything like that. I said to the man this is farther than I thought it would be. I then told him that I felt bad making him drive all this way. He just said that it was fine. The man was not very talkative at all. Each minute that went by, my heart was beating faster and I was getting more nervous. Soon, I finally saw a gas station up ahead to the right side. That had to be it. But this certainly was more than 4 or 5 miles from my car. We had been driving for at least 15 minutes. I asked the man if that was it, but he didn't respond to me. He just drove right past it. When he did, my heart sank. I had a terrible feeling and said to the man that I thought he missed the gas station. Again, he still didn't answer me. Now I knew something was very wrong. I didn't know what to do, but I just wanted to get out of that car. Even sitting in my car on the side of the road stranded would be better than being in that guy's car with him. I wanted to do something, but I wasn't sure what. After another minute or so, I pulled out my phone. I turned it on and looked at it and saw that I still had 0 bars. But as I was noticing that, the man finally spoke again. He said in a stern voice for me to put the phone away. I did, out of fear. We were traveling probably about 50 miles per hour down the road. My thoughts turned to jumping out of the car to the side of the road. There was a grass ditch on the right and a very small shoulder only a few feet past it. But that would still injure me. I looked at the man's door, and the car was so old that you could just pull up the lock to unlock it. I considered doing it, but we were just going too fast. About another couple minutes went by. Now I had been in the car with the man for like 20 or 30 minutes total. I had no clue where he was taking me or what he was doing. He hadn't spoken or said anything in a while. Then I saw a sharp turn coming up ahead. The man would probably have to slow down significantly because this was really sharp. I felt like this was my big opportunity. He began slowing down, and when he got to the turn, we were probably only going like 20 miles per hour. As soon as he hit the middle part of the turn and we were probably traveling the slowest, I turned to my right. I reached and unlocked the door, then opened it, all within the span of like 2 seconds. Then I jumped out as far as I could. When I hit the ground, my feet hit first on the edge of the road, and my body then tumbled into the grass of the ditch. It hurt pretty bad, but it could have been a lot worse. I just felt a little bit shaken up and was able to get to my feet. I saw the man's brake lights and heard his tires screeching. I knew I needed to get out of there, and I took off running into the woods. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran as fast as possible. The woods were not very dense, but it would still be really hard to see me with how dark it was. I kept running as fast as possible and never heard the man running after me or leave his vehicle or anything like that. Soon, I was able to slow down and walk instead of run. I saw a light in the distance and followed it. When I got closer, I noticed that it was a light coming from the front step of a house. This house was certainly out in the middle of nowhere, but I was very happy to see it. I went to the front door and pounded on it. The homeowner, luckily, was home and answered the door. I asked them to call the police, which they did. They didn't let me in the house, but said that I could wait in the driveway. That was fine with me because I felt safe enough that the man wouldn't come back. It took about 10 minutes, but the police got there and I told them everything. I was able to call my roadside service and got a ride back to my vehicle. To make the rest of the story short, I got home all right that night. It was extremely late, but what mattered is that I was back and that I was safe. I ended up getting a new car shortly after that as well. I honestly don't know whatever happened to the man. I just hope that he didn't pick up anybody else. I'm not sure where we were going, but I feel lucky to have made it out of there.
This story took place a few years ago now. I know looking back that the situation could have been handled better on my part. I feel sort of dumb even telling it, but I want other people to hear it, so maybe they learn from my mistakes. I was 19 years old and was at my parents' house. My older sister and her boyfriend were staying over, and we lived in a very populated neighborhood. There are lots of houses on my street, and many other streets nearby as well. Our house is sort of at the end and probably the biggest one. So we were hanging out one night and our plan was to get pizza. My mom made the order and I offered to go pick it up. I had recently gotten a new car and I really enjoyed driving it. I know that we could have had the pizza delivered, but we would always just go get it. The pizza place was just a little over 5 minutes away, so it wasn't a big deal. Plus, we could save money on the tip. So I left the house at some time after 7 p.m. The sun had set and it was pretty dark out by now. I went out to my car and was parked at the top of our driveway. Then I backed out and into the street. As soon as I finished backing out, I saw a car parked on the side of our street with its headlights on a little ways back. There were not a lot of cars parked on the side of the street typically, but it was also not that uncommon. When I started driving away, I saw the car start driving as well, but behind me. I approached the stop sign at the end of our street, and when I reached it, the car was right behind me. I turned, and so did the car.
It was the close following distance that really made me take notice of it though. I was driving the normal way to the pizza place, and when I made the first turn, the car behind me did it as well, but like right up on my bumper. I continued down the street a little ways, and at the next turn, once again, the car did the same thing. That's when I went from thinking maybe it was an overly aggressive driver to somebody deliberately following me. I had absolutely no clue why anybody would want to follow me though. I turned again and sort of pulled over to the side of the road. I wanted the car to go around me, but no. Instead, it started pulling over as well. Then I started to panic. I had no clue what to do, so I got out my phone and I called my mom. When she answered, I told her that I was being followed and I wasn't sure what to do. As I was talking, I kept making random turns and the car would do the same. I was kind of trying to lose the car, but I wasn't doing a very good job. My mom told me to come back home, and if the car was still following me when I got back, she would call the police. So I kept driving and now headed back for home. It took about 5 minutes or so, and the car was behind me the entire time. When I got back to our street, I pulled into the driveway. The car did not pull in after me, but instead drove a little ways down. It appeared to park in the same spot that it was at before on the side of the road. After I parked my car, I got out and sprinted for the front door. I got back inside and then showed my parents from the window where the car was. It was still parked there. We couldn't quite see the license plate though, but we called the police. About 5 minutes later, the car drove away. When the police got there a little while after, it was gone, and I talked to them and told them my story. We were all very disappointed that the car had gone away, and after the police left, I was really nervous that it would have come back. After that though, I never saw it again. Looking back, I should have drove to a police station when the car started following me. I could have called the police as well. I probably shouldn't have gone back home, but I guess the car already did know where I lived. I'm still not sure exactly what was going on there though, or what he wanted from me. This happened when I was driving home from work late at night. It was about 2 years ago now. I live on a pretty quiet road, and several roads leading up to it are also usually pretty empty. It's mostly wild land such as woods and farms and things like that. So late at night, the roads are especially empty. At 2 a.m., you probably have a better chance of running into an animal than another person, and that's about what time it was when I was going back on this night in particular. I've always been a night owl, so it's not uncommon for me to be out at that time. I was just a few miles from arriving back and driving down one of the very calm roads. This road is curvy and surrounded by mostly woods on both sides. I was at a straight stretch of the road, and with my headlights noticed something far ahead. There appeared to be small orange cones set up, blocking most of the roadway. The cones were just in front of a turn on the road, which went around a corner. I slowed down, not sure of what the cones were for. I thought that maybe there was a large pothole or something else. It didn't really seem like construction, but I had been on these roads on a daily basis and wasn't aware of what it could be. So I kept going slower and slower until I realized that I would not be able to go around the cones. Then I came to a stop. When I did, I was trying to decide if I should just turn around or go slightly off the road to make it around these cones. Right after I stopped though, I saw a man appear from around the bend. He was walking towards me, but was not wearing construction clothing or law enforcement clothing either. I was wondering who this guy was and what he was going to do. I could tell that he was looking at me, and the man walked closer to my car and then stopped near the cones. He then moved one of the cones on the end and started to wave my car forward. I slowly began to go forward in the direction that the man was waving me. When I did, he started walking and moved to in front of my car. By now, I was starting to go around the turn. At about this same time, out of nowhere, I saw this other guy walking over. He literally came out of the woods from the passenger side of the road. I also noticed that there were more cones up ahead. The guy coming out of the woods was walking towards my car as well, and I had a really bad feeling about it. I knew these guys had to be up to no good. When the guy was getting even closer, I backed up slightly. Then I turned my wheel and started to go around the guy. When this happened, I heard him begin to shout at me. I really don't remember what he said. Probably just stop or something like that. But I didn't. I ran over several cones and did not care at all. I made my way around the guy and then hit the gas pedal harder. Then I was able to successfully get past the men and the next set of cones as well. I was speeding up, but still driving pretty slowly. Both guys started sprinting after me, but they were not fast enough. I ran right over to the second set of cones and then kept going down the street. There were no problems with the road whatsoever, so I knew that the men had likely just set them up, probably to try to stop traffic, but for what reason, I didn't know. I went the rest of the way back home to my house. Once I was there, I decided to report what happened. I never heard anything more though. I'm guessing that those guys left before the police got there. After that, I never did see them again.
This story takes place about a year ago. I was traveling all by myself on a road trip to visit family. It was a really long drive, and it would most likely take 2 whole days to get there. During the first day, I booked a hotel for a little bit past the halfway point. I wanted to get a little bit more driving done in the first day if possible. Things started out really well, and I only stopped a couple of times for gas, food, and to use the bathroom. I would stop at places that were the quickest, usually rest stops and gas stations just off the highway. I had been up since early in the morning, and if I had enough caffeine, it would usually keep me going. In the afternoon and early evening, though, I hit a rough patch of traffic. I think there was some road construction, and that was just a popular time to be on the road as well. Things got backed up and significantly slowed down for a few hours. I found myself now a bit behind the schedule I was hoping to be on. The hotel was already booked though, so I had to make it. Finally, at probably like 7 p.m., things started to clear up and the roads were much quieter. I was still almost 5 hours away from the hotel though. I stopped for gas, but then went right back on the road to try to save some time. At about 10 p.m., I was still on the road driving. I had an hour and a half to go, and I had no idea where I was. By now, the roads were very quiet, and I was one of the only cars driving. The area that I was in seemed like it was almost in the middle of nowhere. I was getting really tired as well, and had to use the restroom. I decided that I should stop and try to get an energy drink or something. My car was good on fuel, so I wouldn't need to get gas. I started looking for anything off the side of the road that I could go to. There didn't really seem to be anything though. Finally, I saw a sign for a rest stop just up ahead. I pulled off the road and was happy to hopefully get some energy to finish off the drive. As I approached though, the rest stop was a little underwhelming. It was very small, just a little building. There were some parking spaces along the road that went past it and then back onto the freeway. The place was very dimly lit as well, and nobody else was there besides me. I parked my car and then got out and stretched my legs. I'd been driving for quite a long time without a break. Then I walked inside the small building that the rest stop had. Surrounding it was a little grassy area with a picnic table and what looked like a woods behind it. I had been to a similar rest stop before earlier in the day. Once I was inside, I used the restroom and then left. There was nothing inside the building besides a men's and women's restroom and a small lobby area with just some brochures. There was no vending machine, which is what I was hoping for to get an energy drink or something. At some rest stops, they have the vending machines outside on the side of the building instead of inside of it. I decided to walk around and see if they had one. I went around one side, and it was amazing how much darker and quieter it was over there. I heard some crickets chirping in the distance. The ground went slightly downhill as I walked around the building, but there were no vending machines. I got completely behind the building and was walking around to the other side. That's when I got a kind of eerie feeling for some reason. I stopped and looked around at the woods in the night. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like something was moving just inside of the woods, which was about 50 feet away probably. I thought maybe some kind of animal was there, and I sort of saw a tree branch moving a little. I stopped to see what it was, because I was curious, but part of me was wanting to just turn and run back to my car and get out of there. Still, I stood there looking to see what it was. As my eyes adjusted more to the darkness, I started to notice something. There appeared to be a man crouched sort of behind one of the trees. The guy was looking at me. I couldn't really tell any details about him at all, but he appeared to have a beard. After looking at him for a few seconds, he suddenly stood up.
There were no other cars at the rest stop, so I didn't know what he was doing there. After standing, the man took a few steps towards me. I had a really bad feeling, and then the guy suddenly started sprinting in my direction. I took off running for my car as fast as I could. I ran around the building and into the parking area. When I was running, I could hear the man gaining on me from behind. I made it to my car and threw myself inside before slamming and locking the door. As I was scrambling to start my engine and drive away, the man reached my car. He started pounding on the window, and I backed out and drove off after he had smacked my window several times. I got back onto the highway and was really happy to be away from him. I decided to call the police and let them know about what had happened. I didn't want somebody else to stop there and have to encounter him. As for me, I was able to stop a little ways down the road and get an energy drink. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I made it to my hotel just after midnight.
This happened when I was much younger. I want to say it was the summer after I graduated from high school. The situation was that I had just hung out with one of my good friends that night. We would hang out all the time during the summers. I dropped him off at his house because he didn't have a working car at the time, and I then started to drive back to my parents' house. My friend lived about 15 minutes away, which is farther than I liked, but also not too bad. By this time, it was almost midnight. The roads were very quiet, and I only saw a few other cars driving. I made it maybe 5 minutes out of the 15, and then saw that the light up ahead was red. I slowed down and came to a stop. The area that I lived in was pretty quiet. It was a little more rural, and they didn't really have any sidewalks on these particular roads. People pretty much used cars to drive everywhere. As I sat at the red light, I remembered that this particular light always took forever. I would sometimes sit there for what felt like 5 minutes before it would turn green. I'm sure it wasn't actually 5 minutes, maybe like 2 or 3, but it always felt so long, especially late at night when nobody else was on the roads. There were times that I even considered just driving through it because the roads would be so empty. Of course, I never actually seriously considered it, but my point is that the light was ridiculous. So, as I was sitting there waiting for it to turn green, I noticed a guy start walking from where this gas station was on the corner. He then started crossing the road in front of me where a crosswalk would be. This was weird for several reasons. Number one, why was there a guy walking on these roads? Because I had never seen it before. And number two, why was this guy walking on these roads at almost midnight? The guy had really short hair and wore a no-sleeve shirt and had a cigarette in his mouth. His hands were in his pockets, and he crossed the street in front of my car. After he had made it past my car, though, he suddenly stopped. I had expected him to just keep walking. He was on my passenger side and like 5 feet away from my car and in front of it. Then he turned around and faced me, taking a couple of steps closer. I got a bad feeling, like he was going to come up to my window or something. But he didn't, at first at least. He stood there right next to my car looking at me for like 20 seconds. I was hoping that the light would just turn green already. It felt extremely awkward. Then, the man moved closer, right up to my front passenger's window. I thought he would knock on my window, but instead, he just opened the door. Apparently, I had forgotten to lock it. The guy then started to enter my vehicle, and before I knew it, he grabbed my arm. I reacted, trying to shove him away from me. I asked what he was doing, but he just kept trying to overpower me. His knees were on the passenger seat, and his feet were dangling out of the car, while his arms were struggling with mine. I kept pushing at him over and over, and then, finally, he slipped a little. I pushed him again, and he fell down onto the middle console. The guy then got out of the car for a moment, and when he did, I put my car into drive and sped off. I remember seeing the guy standing there as I drove away. It all happened so fast that I was sort of in shock. When I felt safe enough, I then called the police. They investigated what they suspected to be an attempted carjacking. Unfortunately, I never heard if they found the guy or not. This happened many, many years ago. I was driving my car home one night. I was going through a city that I was sort of unfamiliar with and was about an hour and a half away from home. At this point in the drive, I was not on the highway, but a quieter road. I had just driven through a seemingly small town, and things were very quiet. It was late, and I had only seen a couple of other cars out on the road. I was traveling about 35 miles per hour and saw a stop sign coming up. Things were very dark in this section of the road with no streetlights or anything. Surrounding the road was mostly grassy fields and a few trees or woods here and there. At the stop sign that I was approaching, it was a four-way intersection. I slowed down and was just coming to a complete stop. As my car was almost stopped, I suddenly heard a knocking coming from my passenger side window. I looked over, startled. When I did, I saw a man standing there. He was sort of tall, and I couldn't really see his face, but I could see him knocking. It really took me by surprise, and I was wondering who this guy was and what he wanted. I could see him motioning for me to roll down the window, so I did, although I had a bad feeling about it. The man spoke, telling me that he really needed a ride and his car had broken down. He told me that he promised he wasn't dangerous or anything, and asked me multiple times for a ride without me even saying anything. To me, it just came across as really sketchy. I started to shake my head and say no to the guy, and I could tell that he knew I didn't want to. However, my window was still open. The man began to reach inside and said please and that he was desperate. It didn't change my mind though, and I hit the gas and drove away. He was forced to let go of my car, and I left him standing there in the middle of the road. The whole experience was just really strange. As I drove away, I wondered if I had done the right thing, or if maybe he just did need a ride. My instincts were telling me no, and the way that the man reached inside of my car aggressively made him seem anything but innocent. I definitely felt confident with my decision, and I went on with my drive. Thankfully, the roads got better, and I made it home later that night. Following that experience, I was curious, and I tried to look up on the map online where it was. I was able to find the area, and I looked up the city. What I found out was that there had been a string of carjackings and robberies in the area. I'm pretty confident that that guy was going to try to either rob me or steal my car, maybe even something worse. "5 years ago, I worked in the city about 30 minutes from my house. I would make the drive to work every day on a highway for a good part of it. But one day, they decided to shut down a portion of the highway and repave part of it, so I would have to take some back roads to get to and from work for about a month. This was kind of annoying because it would take me an extra almost 10 minutes to get to work every day. One night, I was driving home from work, and it was about 11 p.m., a lot later than I usually worked. The roads were pretty empty though, so that was nice. I got to one of the back roads I would take, which had a bunch of thick woods on both sides of it. I would drive on this road for about a mile, but as soon as I turned onto it, I saw a car speeding up behind me. They were going much faster than me, and even though it was a one-lane road going each way, I figured they were going to go into the opposite traffic lane to pass me. I moved over a bit, but as they came to pass me, they stopped at my same speed and rolled down their window. I looked over and saw two men sitting in the front seats. They were waving their arms at me. I rolled down my window and heard them yell at me that my tire was flat. It took me a few seconds to understand what they were saying. Finally, I got it, and I pulled my car to the side of the road. It was strange because nothing felt off about my car. I came to a stop, and so did the men a short ways in front of me. I got out and began to look at all of my tires. The front ones were definitely not flat, so I walked to the back. As I did, I heard the men approaching. I looked closely at both tires, but neither of them were flat at all. I was confused. I walked back to the front of my car where one of the men was standing, blocking my driver's side door. He also appeared to be looking at my gauges inside my car. I said to the men that my tires were not flat. The other man who was standing in front of my car said to me he had to show me what was wrong and asked me to follow him. He started to walk to the back of my car. This whole thing was starting to seem really sketchy to me at this point, and I really didn't like the other man standing in front of my door like that. I started to walk to the back of the car, curious of what the man was going to say. I was almost there when I heard a lot of rustling in the woods. I looked expecting to see an animal, but saw two men emerging in masks. I ran back towards my driver's door and saw the man now standing there with a smile on his face and his arms out as if he was going to block me from entering my car entirely. I felt like I had been set up. I took 2 quick steps and then shoved the man as hard as I could. We were roughly the same size, and he went back and nearly fell over. It seemed like he wasn't expecting it at all. I took this chance to jump into my car and lock the doors immediately. Of course, the second after I did that, multiple doors tried to be opened by the men. I started the engine and put the car into drive. The man I had shoved attempted to stand in front of my car to block me from driving away.
I had to drive slightly off the road, and then got back onto the road to avoid hitting the man. Then I sped away. I figured the men would try to chase me, but they didn't. Once I got off of that road, I slowed down and made sure I wasn't being followed, then called the police. I don't know what the intentions of those men were. Maybe it was to try to rob me, but either way, it was a scary situation.
This happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. I travel a lot for work, and I usually drive from the different locations. I was about 5 hours away from home at this time, and I was going to be driving back. When I had finished with work at that location, I left to drive home at about 6 p.m. I knew that I would be getting home really late, but I had the next few days off, so I didn't mind the long day. Hours of driving went by very smooth. I had the directions all set up on my phone through Apple Maps. I was making great time, and I felt like I would get home a little bit sooner than I expected. But at one point, maybe 3 hours into the drive, I was told to take an exit by my phone. This confused me a little, but I knew I had the directions in it, so I followed what it told me to do. I ended up driving on this quiet road for like 20 minutes, and then it told me to take a left. When I did that, this road looked even quieter than the previous one. I realized then that my signal was starting to go out as well. Luckily, the map was still working though. I was getting really confused, so I pulled over on the side of the road and grabbed my phone to take a look at the map. I realized that it had automatically rerouted me because of potential flooding. It wasn't even raining, but there had been a lot of rain in the area the past few days. The road that I was on was extremely quiet and looked to be in the middle of nowhere. I kept the directions up, because if I canceled them to start over, I would not have any due to me not having a signal. I merged my car back onto the empty road and continued to follow the route home, which was now on backroads. Probably a minute later, my car dinged. I saw that I was almost out of gas. I kept driving, and I decided that I would look out for a gas station up ahead. I was sure that I would see one, but the more I drove, it was just the same. Grass and some trees on both sides of the road. 30 minutes or so went by, and I was still driving on that quiet road with no gas station in sight. My tank was really low at this point, and I was getting nervous. I got desperate, and I turned off of the road that I was on, hoping that another road would lead me to a gas station. My phone started rerouting again, and after that I had no signal and the map wouldn't load. I took another turn at my next opportunity, and now I was just making things worse. I turned around and went back to the first road that I had been on, after realizing I was going into an even quieter area. Shortly after I got onto that road, my car came to a stop. I had completely run out of fuel. Now, my car was stopped on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere with no signal. I had not seen any other cars as I had been driving down this road. It was almost 10 p.m. I sat in my car trying to get my phone to work. I restarted it, but I still couldn't get a signal. Then I saw headlights in the distance coming up behind me. I considered getting out of my car and trying to ask for help, but I ultimately decided not to. The car passed me by. That was the first car that I had seen on this road. I kept sitting inside of my car, wondering what I should do in this situation. I then noticed brake lights on the car that had passed me. By now, it was sort of a long ways up the road, but it appeared to be stopping. It sat on the road for a minute or so. I thought this was strange. Then, it looked like it was starting to turn around. After that, I lost sight of it. Maybe 30 seconds later, I saw the car again. It was driving up on the other side of the road now, but its headlights were off. I was confused and wondered what exactly they were doing. They parked on the other side of the road, about 50 feet up from my car. I kept my eyes on them as the driver's door started to open. I saw a man step out and start to walk in the direction of my car. It was really dark, and I couldn't see very well, but as he got closer, I could see that this man was wearing what looked like a ski mask on his face. I had a really bad feeling. When it was clear that he was walking to my car, I decided I needed to leave. I took my phone, keys, and wallet and moved over into the passenger seat, then opened the door as quietly as I could. Then I swung the door open and ran into the grass on the side of the road. There was a bit of woods, and I ran for it. I could barely hear the person starting to run in my direction. I ran deeper and deeper into the woods. I kept going for as long as I could. When I was running, I thought I heard noise in the woods behind me, and I knew that the man was chasing after me. He was a ways back, but I knew I needed to run as fast as I possibly could. I was getting whacked by tree branches left and right. After probably 10 minutes of this, I found a spot that looked good for hiding. I wasn't really hearing the noises behind me anymore, so I decided I would hide there. I took a large stick and tossed it deeper into the direction that I had been running in the thick woods. Then I quietly hid myself behind a large log that was sort of broken. It had probably been shelter to an animal, but it was a good place for me to hide now. I heard a few noises in the woods a long ways back. Then it was pretty quiet. Some more time went by and things became very quiet. I kept waiting there for probably 30 minutes. Then I finally felt safe enough to leave my hiding spot. I walked back through the woods, trying to go in the same direction that I had come from. After about another half hour of walking, I finally made it back to the road. I was tired from all the running and walking through the woods. Luckily, I didn't see the other car on the road when I got back. I was a little ways down from my car, and I walked back to it. As I was approaching my car, I saw headlights coming again. At first, I was about to run back into the woods, thinking that it might be the same guy, but I realized that these headlights were much bigger and those of a truck instead of a car. I decided to stay by my car. The truck actually slowed down and came to a stop behind me. A man got out, who turned out to be a really nice guy who lived in the area. I told him about running out of gas, and he happened to have a small 2-gallon gas can in the back of his truck that he carried around. He let me put it into my car for free. Then, he gave me directions to the nearest gas station. After he left, I was able to make it to the gas station, which was only like 2 miles away. It was a long night, but I finally made it home.
I had to go on a pretty long road trip for work a couple of years ago. We had to travel, but I decided to drive instead of fly because I thought it would be more fun. I had a couple of days off before work started in that location, and when we were done, I had a whole week off. During the time that I was there, we would be working for about a week and a half straight. So anyways, I drove straight there on the way, and when we were done, I took my time driving back. I stopped at a few parks that I wanted to go to, and also stopped at some major cities and locations as well. On my road trip back, I would be spending 2 days just outside of a city where there were a lot of cool parks. I had a hotel, and I was busy exploring for most of the days. During the second day, I went to a really busy park with a bunch of hiking trails and some great views. At one of the hiking spots that was somewhat busy, I ran into a guy who was from the same state as me. We had a brief conversation, and he was really friendly. He said that his name was Mark, and we were from the same general area. It was funny to meet someone else from the same area so far away. Our conversation went on for a while, and Mark ended up asking me what hotel I was staying at. I told him, not realizing how weird it was at the time. But after that, the whole conversation sort of went from normal and friendly to a little weird. I ended up just saying that I really had to go and kind of walked away. He had started out seeming so normal to me and then seemed somewhat creepy at the end. We went our separate ways, but I didn't see him for a while. I did happen to notice him when I was leaving about an hour later though, but there were still quite a few other people in that area, so I didn't think too much of it. That was probably sometime in the afternoon. I went somewhere else and then went to the local city before going back to my hotel for the night. I got back at maybe 9 p.m. or so. I stayed in my hotel room watching the TV until I got tired. Sometime later, at maybe 10:30 at night, there was a knock on my hotel room door. I got up and walked over to see who was there. It was Mark. He was standing right outside of the door. This surprised me, but I remembered that I had told him where I was staying. I felt really stupid, but just telling him did not mean that I had invited him over. And how would he know which room was mine? I decided not to answer the door. I watched out of the peephole as he continued to stand there. He knocked on the door again and waited. I was sort of nervous because I didn't know what he wanted or anything about him really. He had been seeming pretty weird towards the end of our conversation earlier. Mark stood there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes before turning and walking away. I was glad to see him go, but I had a feeling that he might return. The hotel that I was staying in was pretty average. It wasn't fancy or anything, but it also wasn't that bad. My room was on the first floor and on the back side of the hotel. Maybe 2 minutes after Mark left, I had returned to the bed that I was sitting on. That's when I heard a knocking on my window now. I looked and saw Mark standing there, right at the window and looking at me. He waved me over. I got up and walked over to the window, but to close the blinds. When I did, Mark started banging louder on the window. It didn't last very long though before he stopped. I thought maybe after that he had left, but he didn't. There was another knocking on the front door of my hotel room again just a few minutes later. I got up to check, and sure enough, it was Mark again. I went back over to my bed, and this time I called the police. I wasn't even going to bother calling the hotel and complaining to them. They didn't have a security guard or anything, so there probably wasn't much that they could do. I explained the situation to the 911 operator and was told that somebody would be there shortly. Mark had stopped knocking by then and was now gone. I wasn't sure where he went, but I expected him to come back either to the window or the door. The police arrived several minutes later, and I spoke with them as they looked around for Mark. Unfortunately, he had taken off and left. The police found that he had broken into my car. My rear passenger's window was smashed. Items inside were messed up, but surprisingly, nothing was stolen. I'm not sure if he did that because he was mad at me, or if he was trying to steal something. Either way, I never saw him again, and I'm hoping that I never do.
This happened in Northwest Florida. It was in April of 2013 and a Sunday. My sister and I went to pick up my brother, whom was being released from prison. This was when inmates were being released at midnight instead of 7 a.m. The drive was 7 hours from where we lived, so we rented a car and we made it to town safely at 10 p.m. Central Time, which was an hour behind our time zone. My sister had to use the bathroom, so we were riding around in the car trying to locate an open business for her to use the bathroom in. I was driving and pulled up to a red light. I decided to make a left-hand turn, so I got into the left turning lane. As I pulled up to the light, there was a 1990s Ford F-150 in the straight lane. We were the only two vehicles at the light and on the road. The driver was a white male in his late 20s or early 30s. My sister and I looked over at him, but he sat there, nervously biting his nails, never acknowledging our presence or looking our way. We thought it was sort of weird, especially being that we pulled up beside him, and we were the only two cars out. The light turned green for us both, and he sped off from the light before we could even acknowledge the change of the light. So I proceeded with my left turn, and I began to drive down this long road that seemed endless. My sister and I are attentive, so as we were driving, we noticed lights behind us in our same lane, but we didn't give it much thought because they weren't close enough for us to be too concerned. After driving about 3 miles down the road, my sister and I agreed that this was an old-fashioned town, and everything closes at about 6 p.m. on Sundays in a town like it, so we needed to turn around. Although the decision for us to turn around wasn't sudden to us, it was sudden to the driver speeding behind us in our lane. I decided to make a U-turn at the next opening in the road, causing the driver behind us to take the other lane to keep from hitting us from behind. We looked to see who almost hit us, and it was the same 1990s Ford F-150 that was at the red light with us. The same car that took off before we realized the light was even green. We didn't know how he could have possibly gotten behind us so quickly, because we noticed the lights about 40 seconds after we turned, and we just watched him take off at the green light going straight and not the direction we had gone. My sister then asked me to just take her to the prison to wait for our brother to be released, so we went to the prison to get our brother. We didn't know who that guy was in the truck. The way everything transpired with him not acknowledging us, biting his nails nervously, and then speeding off as soon as the light changed was very creepy. I'm just thankful we didn't find out what he possibly had planned.
Last summer, I went on a cross-country road trip with my best friend Emma. Between the two of us, we could drive for very long periods of time. We were switching off when we got tired, and sometimes one of us would drive while the other slept. I remember that on one of the first nights of the trip, we found ourselves driving on a quiet highway late at night. I don't know exactly what time it was, but we were about the only car on the road. We had stopped for gas maybe 30 minutes earlier and got some coffee as well. We were in the right lane, and I was driving with Emma in the front passenger seat. We were casually talking to each other, and a car appeared behind us in the rearview mirror. I was driving probably 5 miles per hour over the speed limit and was on cruise control. The car behind us approached, going maybe 5 miles per hour faster than us. When it got closer, it changed to the left lane and then started passing us. The car was a black SUV, and when it got in front of us, it pulled into the right lane. After it did, it slowed down significantly. It's like whoever was driving took their foot off the gas pedal entirely.
It was kind of rude, to be honest, and I switched lanes to the left to go around them. When I did, though, they immediately switched to the left lane, as if to throw a block at me. The SUV had no license plates on it at all, and I had a sort of bad feeling. We were going slower and slower, and wondering what this person's problem was. I quickly switched lanes again, and this time, I was able to pass them. As I did, I looked over and saw a man driving. He looked over at us as we passed. I was speeding up significantly because we had slowed down to probably 40 miles per hour or something. The roads we were on had a speed limit of 70. The guy in the SUV then started speeding up extremely fast as well. I got back up to about 70, and the guy was now right behind us. We remained this way for probably 10 minutes. He was like one car length behind us, and it became obvious that he was going to follow us wherever we went. I didn't know what his problem was with us. Emma suggested that we take the next exit and see if the man would take the exit too. And when the next one came up, I did just that. The guy followed us off the highway to the exit ramp. We didn't know where we were or what direction this was leading us in either. After taking the exit, I went right because it seemed like there were a couple of businesses over there and not much to the left. The guy was still behind us in the black SUV. I saw a gas station and there were 2 other cars there at the pumps. This made me feel a little bit safer and I pulled in. We didn't even need gas though, but I parked next to one of the pumps anyways because it was well lit. The guy in the black SUV parked at a gas pump that was a little ways away from us. Emma and I got out of our car and walked inside the building. It was Emma's idea to go inside, and I'm not really sure exactly why, but we did. When we got inside, there was another person in the gas station, as well as an employee. The guy from the SUV did not follow us in. It felt safer being inside and away from him, but I also knew that we would have to return to our vehicle and keep driving eventually. I was hoping that the guy would drive away and leave. I walked over to the front of the store to look out the window. When I did, I saw the man moving from behind his car to behind ours. He was sort of crouched down, like he was hiding from us as well. I went over to Emma, who was at another spot inside the gas station. I told her about the guy, and we called the police. We told them what was going on, and clearly the man was up to something bad. He sat there, hiding behind our car for quite a while. From where he was at, we couldn't see him at all though. I just knew that he hadn't left because I would have seen him leave. If we had gone back to our vehicle without knowing, who knows what would have happened. We spoke with the employee of the gas station and told him what was going on, and about 10 minutes later, a police car entered the gas station parking lot. Emma and I were watching from the window the whole time. We saw the guy run out from behind our car, back to his SUV and get in. The police flashed their lights, and the man attempted to drive away. Both him and the police car left the parking lot. There seemed to be a police chase after that, but it didn't last too long. The guy ended up being caught a little ways down the street. After that, Emma and I were able to continue with our road trip. It still creeps me out to think about that man though. Possibly he saw us at the previous gas station that we had been to, and decided to follow us for some reason. That's my best guess. What his intentions were, I have no idea. I used to go on quite a few road trips. I would travel all around the country and was able to actually sleep out of my car. Now, I wasn't living in my car or anything like that. I have a house and had one then too. But my career allows a lot of free time, and my favorite thing to do is travel. When I drive, I'm able to see whatever I want and stop whenever I want to, so I really enjoy it. I save money on hotels and convenience by sleeping in the back of my SUV. I set it up with a small mattress in the back, and 2 of the seats are removed. I have a bunch of blankets and pillows to make it comfortable, and I also have covers for all of the windows. The rest of the space, I can store whatever luggage that I have. I usually will park anywhere I can to sleep, and I don't make it obvious that I'm sleeping there. The usual places would be rest stops, large parking lots, or sometimes even the side of a street if there are a bunch of other cars there. It can get a little bit sketchy at times, but I've never actually had a real problem or scary occurrence. But that all changed about 6 months ago. Now, this was my 5th road trip where I would be sleeping in my car. I expected everything to go smoothly as the others had. I was going to be driving a couple of states away, staying there for a few days, and then heading back. The first night, I stayed at a really busy rest stop. The second night, I parked and slept in a Walmart parking lot. And on the third night, I wasn't able to find a decent place right away. I was driving on the road and got tired sort of quickly. I pulled off to search for a place in the area, but it was pretty sparse. There were no Walmarts or anything like that. The only real option that I saw was a rest stop a few miles up the road. I drove there and pulled in, hoping for it to be similar to the one I had stayed at before. But this one was not like it at all. The rest stop was really old and outdated looking. The building was also smaller, and there were like 2 other cars in the parking lot only. The parking lot was pretty big and not well lit. I had a bad feeling, and this is not a place I would normally stay at, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was tired, so I decided that I would make it work. I parked sort of closer to the building and got out to use the bathroom and brush my teeth. After that, I got back inside of my car and got it ready for sleeping. I covered all of my windows from the inside and got my bed set up. This didn't take me too long, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Then I was ready to go to sleep. Things were very silent as I laid down and closed my eyes. I relaxed and was asleep within minutes. The next thing that I remember is waking up at some time, knowing that it was still night. I heard a noise of somebody walking right outside of my vehicle. I couldn't see anything outside because of my window covers, but I could see a shadow. There looked to be somebody standing right outside of my car on the right side. Then I saw another shadow come into view. Somebody else was there as well. I didn't know why people would be walking so close to my car. I was wide awake now, and my heart started racing. One of the people started walking around my car, and then I heard more footsteps. It seemed as though there were 3 people now walking around it. I was silently waiting for them to leave and wondering what was going on. I looked at my watch, 3 o'clock in the morning. One of the people seemed to head to the back end of my car, and the other 2 went to the front. Then, suddenly, there was a huge loud noise coming from the back. It was like somebody had taken a hammer to my back window. It didn't break, but it was very loud. Then there was another whack, and this time, I heard the window starting to break. I instantly jumped up and found my keys, which I always had right next to me as I slept. I jumped over into the front seat of the car. Without even taking the window cover off, I started the engine. There was another strike to the back of the car, and I heard the window breaking even more. After I started the vehicle, I heard some shouting from outside. I couldn't tell you what was said though. Finally, I took off the first window cover just enough to see. 2 men stood there. I started backing up, and the window was hit again with whatever tool they were using. The other men charged at my car, and after backing up, I saw the other guy, who had been in the back, holding what appeared to be a hammer in his hand. The man was standing just to the left of my car and behind it. He swung the hammer at my back window as I finished backing up. Then, as I started to drive away, he threw the hammer at my car, breaking one of the rear side windows. I sped out of there, leaving all 3 men standing around the space that I had parked at. My heart was racing, and I got onto the road and drove for a while. I was able to compose myself and called the police and told them everything. I drove to a nearby town and got a hotel there for the night. When I looked at my car, there was significant damage to the back and one of the side windows, but luckily, I was not harmed. The police did an investigation to find the guys, but I never heard back if they were found or not. This happened shortly after I first got my driver's license. I was about 16 years old. Back then, I was driving an old car that my parents didn't use anymore. I was really lucky to have a car that I could drive right after getting my license because I couldn't afford to buy one on my own. During that time, I had a job at a store about 15 minutes away from where we lived. I was glad that I was able to drive myself to and from work because in the past, I needed to get a ride from my parents. Probably 2 weeks or so after getting my license, I was driving home from work one night. I got off at 10 p.m., so it was probably a little bit past then. The roads weren't too busy anymore, and I took the highway back most of the way. When I pulled off of the highway to another road, a car pulled off behind me, but it wasn't until my next turn that I thought anything of it. I turned a little bit late onto that road. Not on purpose, but because that turn just kind of snuck up on me a bit. I was really new to driving and made little mistakes like that. So when I turned, the car behind me suddenly turned right after me. It was only then that I realized how strange it was. They would only do that if they were intentionally following me. I drove down the road with the car behind me. It wasn't right behind me or anything, just a normal distance. I had about 3 more turns to make before my street. Soon, I made the first one. The car did the same. Each time I turned, I was hoping to see the car just keep driving, but it didn't. By the time I was getting close to my street, I was extremely worried.
I wanted to call my parents and tell them what was going on. Unfortunately, I didn't have a cell phone at the time. I also didn't want to drive home. If I did, whoever was behind me would know where we lived, and I didn't know who this person was. I was debating what to do, but when my street came, I turned onto it. It was something that I instantly regretted because the car turned right after me. Our street was pretty quiet. There was only like 15 houses on it, and it was a cul-de-sac. As I got closer to my house, I knew that I wasn't going to turn into the driveway. When I got to the cul-de-sac, I drove around it and then went back down my street. The car behind me followed just as they had been the entire time. After I made it off of the street and back onto a slightly busier one, I knew that I had to think of something. I drove down that road for a little ways and then decided that I would go to a busier area. The area that my house was in was pretty quiet. There was a lot of land and not as many businesses or people around in general. I started heading back towards where I worked. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go, but I just wanted to get to a busier area. I would feel safer with more people around. Maybe I would drive all the way to the city, but I certainly was not going to stop anywhere around my house. I followed turn for turn the directions to my job. Like I said, I didn't have a cell phone, so that also meant that I could only go places that I already knew directions to. I didn't have access to a map or anything to guide me. I remember that I made it all the way back to my job and then turned into the parking lot. It was a shopping center with multiple stores in it. The car first turned in behind me, but then suddenly turned off and drove away. I was really surprised, but didn't take any time in driving as far as I could away from it. I went to the other side of the parking lot and took a road that wrapped around back to the highway that I needed to take to get home. When I drove home, I was very careful to look and make sure that I wasn't followed. I got home okay, and my parents were wondering why I was late. I told them about what had happened. They said that if that ever happened again, to go to a police station, which I wish I would have thought of, although I didn't know where one was off the top of my head and would have needed a map. After that, I got a phone only about a week later. Nothing remotely close to that has happened since. About 5 years ago, I was driving back home from work late one night. I worked at a restaurant/bar at the time and often worked very late, so it was past midnight when I was finally going home and driving my Honda Accord. I lived with my parents during this time in a neighborhood about 10 minutes from my job. So after leaving work, I got onto the roads, which were very quiet, as they often were in the late night hours. It was a huge difference from when I would go to work and there would be lots of cars on the road, to when I would drive home and there would be basically nobody. So within probably 2 or 3 minutes of driving home, I did notice a car behind me. When it started following me though, I had no idea. I kept driving home and was realizing that the car behind me was turning wherever I did. Soon, I was very suspicious that I was being followed. I was never quite 100% sure though. I thought maybe it was a neighbor or something. There are many other houses in the neighborhood. Still, I was suspicious by it. Soon, I had made it to the street where my parents' house was. I turned onto it, and the car behind me did the same. I actually thought about driving around the block or turning around, but ultimately, I drove to my house and pulled into the driveway. I remember being really nervous as I was pulling in that the car would as well, but it didn't. Instead, the car kept going down the street. I felt much better, and then got out of my car and walked inside. By now, my parents and sister had long gone to bed upstairs. The lights were off inside the house, and it was very quiet. I went into the kitchen to make some ramen noodles or something like that. I was very hungry and wanted something quick to have before bed. As I was waiting for the water to heat up though, I casually walked around a little. I went into the living room and glanced out the front window. That's when I noticed a car driving extremely slow down the street. And I further noticed that it was the same car that had seemingly followed me all the way home. Now I was very suspicious. I continued to watch out the window. The car then turned and parked on the side of the street just past our house. I heard the engine turn off and then watched the driver's door open and saw a man get out. He then started walking towards our front yard. That's when I jumped back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. I went back into the kitchen and just hoped that this guy wasn't going to try to break in or something. Seconds later though, there was a knock at the front door. My heart started racing.
What could this guy possibly want? Several moments went by, and he knocked again. I slowly walked into the living room and went to a window. When I looked outside, I saw the man walking away from the front door, but he wasn't going back to his car. Instead, he walked around the side of our house. I went back into the kitchen and looked out of a back window. I was very careful when I was looking so that I wouldn't be seen. The man appeared to walk through the backyard. He made his way through the backyard and then went out of sight again. I then went back to the front of the house. When I looked out of the window, I didn't see the guy for a while. Soon, though, I saw him going through the front yard. He went back to his car, then got inside. Then he drove away. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I looked out of the window a few more times that night, but he didn't come back. I still wonder who he was, why he followed me home, and what he was doing.
This happened when I was younger. My family went on a road trip to visit my grandparents. We made this trip several times, and during this one, I was probably about 12. It was about a 5-hour drive to get there, so we were able to do the entire drive in one day, but as a kid, it felt so long. During this trip, about 3 hours into the drive, we needed to get gas, so we stopped at a gas station. I had to use the restroom, but nobody else needed to, so I got out and went inside the store. I remember that after I went inside and used the bathroom, I looked around a couple of aisles to see if there was anything that I wanted. My mom had told me that if I wanted to get something, I could. As I looked around in one of the snack aisles, I noticed this one guy just staring at me. The guy was sort of short and sort of chubby, but aside from that, I don't remember much. I didn't really know what he was doing, but I soon walked into the next aisle over. Soon, I saw the man there as well. It just kind of gave me a bad feeling, and I decided not to get anything and just to leave. I walked out and left the store and went back to our car. I got back inside and waited for my dad to finish. He was now cleaning the windows with those window cleaners they have at the gas station. After I was back inside the car, I looked out the window, just observing the area. I saw the man who had been seemingly staring at me inside the store. He walked out of the convenience store and to a car which was parked at one of the parking spaces in front. I remember noticing him look in our direction, and I looked away, although I don't think he saw me because the back windows to our car were sort of tinted. I looked back and saw him getting into the driver's seat of the car. The car then sat there for a while, and soon my dad was finally done and got back inside and we left. We had a few more hours still to go, and we began leaving the gas station parking lot. I was still looking around, and I noticed the man's car start to leave around the same time as us. In fact, as we were waiting to merge back onto the road, he got right behind us. Soon, we did get back on the road and onto the freeway, but the man followed us the entire time. I remember noticing him driving on the freeway right behind us, and I figured that it was just a coincidence. I thought maybe he was just going the same direction as us, and I stopped paying attention. But I looked back probably about 30 minutes later, and the guy was still there. He was still directly behind us too. I started then to get a little concerned. I remembered that a short time later, my brother said he had to use the bathroom. My dad was slightly annoyed and said that he should have gone at the last gas station. Still, he pulled off at the next exit. When we did, the guy behind us did the same. My parents and brother were unaware of this guy following. I'm not sure why, but I didn't say anything to them. My dad found a gas station not far off at all, and we pulled in. My dad parked right out front, and the guy in the car following us parked on the other side of the lot. Just my brother went in and used the bathroom, then he returned a minute or so later. When we left, the guy following us left too. He hadn't even gotten out of his car. There was no question in my mind now that he was following us. We kept driving on the road towards my grandparents, and I was getting more and more concerned. What if the guy followed us all the way there? Probably another 30 minutes or so went by, and the guy was still there. Then, unbelievably, I saw him turn off at a random exit. After that, I never saw him again. I didn't even tell my parents about it, because I was just happy that the guy was gone. I'm convinced, though, that he was following us. Maybe he thought that we lived around there and wanted to see where exactly. I'm not sure why else he would suddenly stop, but I'm just glad that he left us alone.